Hello there, and welcome to another round of lore ramblings, and welcome to another edition of Chronicles of Darkness's Dark Era run. Name's Adam.
And I'm Tech Priest, and this is the Master's Tools, which is a fantastic little setting for Demon.
It is also the
Um,
last setting in the companion piece because we started out of order. We're just gonna jump whenever we feel like it.
yeah, the companion piece is a little less necessary of like reading in order. You've already kind of got an idea of it,
Also, on top of that,
and
it actually was, I believe, rewarded to backers who I think had a certain amount of money put into the original Dark Eras. They got a copy of this for free. It was just
kind
stuff
of
that
though
they couldn't
that's
fit in there.
yeah, it's more because of that. Like this, a lot of this was stuff that got kickstarted for companion for Dark Eras, and then just kind of ended up in companions.
Yep, because they just didn't too many pages. They didn't want to make another doorstopper like Mage 20th.
Yeah,
Also
to be fair,
happy.
this is like 300 pages on its own. And I mean, the original one. Let me double check the
I
page
think the
count on that
original one
because I
was like
want to say it's around
500
400,
plus. I think it was about 500 actually.
600 pages.
Oh, I was closer.
So yeah, they're the reason for the companion is literally. Do you want a 1,000 page book, or should we split it into like two, maybe
Hey, do
three?
you want another copy of Mage 20th? Do you want to be able to like use it as a cudgel for a particularly stubborn player? Do you want to
Do
be
you want to
able to
use it as a
weaponize it?
murder lesson? Yeah,
Also, happy Labor Day Movement Day. I forget if it's May the 5th or if it's May 1st. Either way, that's the other reason I chose to do this one.
yeah.
So that,
Anyway,
yep.
so first off, a couple of things about the setting time. A lot of people forget this about the Russian Revolution. It could have gone about a bazillion different ways.
Oh, hell
The
yeah.
way that it went was not inevitable, and a lot of it comes down to how it turned out. Of everyone in Russia was a fucking idiot.
We'll get into that, but I just wanted to show the opening piece of art because this is very much inspired. It's not exact because they didn't do it exactly right, but this has strong the assassination of Grigory Rasputin energy. He's just not in a carpet. It's mainly because, much like Rasputin, this man is being tossed into the river. I think it's even the same river, the Neva. But yeah, legitimately, the Russian Revolution could have gone a million different ways. Hell, there was actually a lot of way. Russia in the last 20 years could have gone differently in a million ways. Uh, just starting as early as the 1900s, particularly how 1905 was responded, could have been very different. Actually, a fun fact about that. Do you want to? Do you know what started the 1905 revolution?
Uh, Part of it was, I think, a grain price increase. I want to say that was partially it. And then what kind of happened is that the Russo-Japanese War was causing conscription out in Siberia. And there's a priest that kind of got involved that was a Japanese agent,
He
and he
was
was trying to
not.
raise some.
So there was a lot of complications. You are right. They went through localized famines, mainly because a lot of the grain was being used to ship to raise war taxes, essentially raise war funds, because Russia was running bust. They also just lost most of their fucking navy twice.
Yep.
So they needed that. On top of that, they were just recently getting losing hard. I believe they lost Port Arthur by this point, and the Japanese were making motions to try to pull a funny invasion of Vladivostok. So what happened is because of the raised grain prices, famines, particularly among the poorest of the workers, I believe in particular women were most affected. Legitimately, during International Women's Day, there was an actual organized protest from the textile workers. And I believe a day later, he was just a priest. He was a normal parish priest who he had a little letter who was just asking the czar for a little bit of help with the grain supplies to his flock. And the soldiers fucking shot him because he was going to his pocket to grab the letter and they fucking
Yeah.
shot him.
This was not the first protest that ended this
Oh, it
way, but it
wasn't
was
even
the
a
first one that
protest.
ended.
It was legitimately a peaceful march. towards the Winter Palace.
Yeah.
And Nicholas wasn't there
It
at the
wasn't the
time,
first
actually.
yeah. I was trying to say it wasn't the first time that something like this had sort of happened in Russia before, but
I believe
the
a
main
similar
difference
thing
between this
happened in
one,
Moldova. Like Moldovan peasants actually tried to march to the Kiev government because of something like that.
yeah, the main thing though that made this explode is that there's newspapers now in Russia, a lot of them,
And
and
because you're in a
there's been
factory,
a
you're more exposed to literature. Russia finally actually has, I think, a quarter of its population capable of reading by this point. Yes, it took that long.
yeah,
And
when other countries are pushing like 90% literacy rates, Russia is just getting at 25%.
25 or 30, but
Abs
that does mean you probably don't know how to read, but you know someone who does.
Yep.
So they can read it to you about how the war is going. And this is with Russian propaganda because they had nothing good.
They're like,
We are sending the
I
3rd Pacific Naval Squadron, which is nicknamed the Sink by Themselves Squadron because of how
the second
obsolete.
it's the yeah there's the second Pacific Squadron and then the third is really part of the second, but they got detoured in a different direction. It's a shit show. There's a fantastic video by Drachenfell on it. I highly recommend it. The
It
Voyage
is
of the
lovely.
Damned. It is amazing. Um,
But you're able to
there is
read these
still one
videos,
survivor of that flotilla still floating today, and that's over in St. Petersburg. The cruiser Aurora
which also
is the
was responsible for the 17 revolution. She fired her guns in
yes,
anger.
she was. She was part of the 17 revolution as well. Um, but yes, the which is part of the reason why she was survived as a museum ship for so long, and then she kind of transferred over because she is a very important part of Russian history of the 20th century.
Oh yeah, she's one of the
She's
only survivors of Tsushima that actually stayed in Russian hands. A lot of them were actually sold to the Japanese, who eventually sold them back for an even greater profit. Some of them.
yeah,
She
she was
survived the
in
Russian Revolution, which is not an easy feat.
well, she survived the naval engagements of the First World War in the Baltic. There were a few of those, and then she also survived the Russian Revolution, where a lot of the fleet ended up getting sunk.
Or scuttled.
Um,
They also scuttled themselves quite a bit.
yes, the captains often ended up scuttling certain ships so that other factions couldn't get their hands on them. And the British also did some funny stuff with torpedo boats around Estonia,
Oh yeah.
where they managed to sink a couple of cruisers. There were in fact British naval engagements with the Russian forces in the Revolution. Uh, and this is one of the reasons why when people go like, why were the Soviets so paranoid about everything to the West? And the answer to that one is probably mostly the goddamn motherfucking British.
Well, it's not just the British.
Holy shit.
Let's think. The British expedition, the French sending troops up to Arkhangelsk and actually down to the Black Sea, the American
The
intervention
Vladivostok,
that was supported
yeah,
by the Japanese.
Vladivostok one, the polar bear expedition as well. There's
Yep.
also the Germans were getting involved in Finland and were also active in Ukraine at this time.
Yes, they were.
There is a lot going on in Russia that, oh, don't forget there's also a new polar state that has been just kind of formed out of nothing.
Oh, and don't forget
Um,
that even among what they thought were their own supporters, they actually were experiencing massive resistance. In particular, in the Ukraine, which legitimately, despite the larger component of them actually agreeing with at least the left SR governments collectively at this point, because this is before the Bolsheviks actually got fully in power. They actually told the Moscow government, "Yeah, go fuck yourselves. We are not joining you. Slava Ukraina."
basically, and they held out for
And
quite a
then the
while.
anarchist ones said the same thing, but with machine gun carts.
Yeah, again, they held out for quite a while, about 4 years, really.
Yeah.
Um,
So Russia, the Soviets were very paranoid as a result of this. But this is actually okay. Russian Revolution. Very very simple setup. There was already a failed revolution in 1905 because of the horrible conditions. Tsar Nicholas II waffled and blinked and belatedly gave some limited attempt at reform, mostly just to get people to go away. But like most
yes,
autocrats, he then immediately went back on his word and completely defanged the Duma, which was his attempt to,
right.
yeah.
Now this necessarily wouldn't have been a problem if he had appointed anyone with competence into his government.
But
The
Nicholas II was a kind of weak-willed guy and tended to
Yeah,
just hire people that he didn't need them to agree with him, but just anyone
just do
forceful he
something.
couldn't deal with.
Yeah, just anyone who could do
He would
something,
usually send
basically.
his wife to deal with them,
Yeah.
which is
The
also one
next
of the
bit with
many
that,
reasons why his wife was hated. She was much more
yes,
forceful than he was.
it also gets into a few other kind of issues that were popping up where it's like there were people who were doing it like genuine attempts at like reforming
Yeah, I mean,
peasant
yeah, you got
agriculture in
Sergei
Russia.
Witt partially, and then Stolypin especially.
Yes. Who is the guy, the prince that did the major push for like a peasant economic thing? I can't remember his name off the top of
It
my
might have
head.
been Grand Duke Mikhail.
I
Mikhail
I don't think it was
was,
Mikhail. It was someone else, but he was very he's
I
part of the
mean,
reason
other
why the
Grand
Soviets
Dukes
had as much
include,
success as they did.
there was another Grand Duke who was named Nicholas. I don't think it was him.
Yeah, it wasn't him.
Could have been Kyril.
It might have been Kirill. The point being though that like the knowledge in the Russian government that shit is fucked in Russia and we need to try fixing this
Well,
was
Russia,
not uncommon.
they knew.
But
They knew there were a lot of problems mechanically with their industry, with their society, at least to a degree, with their transportation. In terms of military, they in particular knew that they had horrible logistics due to their rail systems inadequacies, due to the organization of their supply officers, and on top of that, just straight up industrial output. A really good example of this is the Russian Imperial Air Service. At the start of World War One, they had the largest air force out of the Entente.
yeah, they did.
They
The
had a
Russians
larger air
invested
force than
heavily.
France and the United Kingdom. The
The
pro-
Russians invested heavily in a lot of new technologies. Like they were one of the first to get behind the Maxim gun. They were one of the first to get behind air power as a thing.
Mhm.
There was a lot of genuine attempts to try to
also,
be like, oh,
also,
we can get ahead of the curve, and
as
then they
soon as
failed.
the French made the French 97 Model 97, they made their own using Russian measurements. That was a copy of it, actually. That's why it's
Yes.
76.2 millimeters.
Yes, there's a few other
As soon
kind of
as they
things that
saw
happen.
it, they would copy it. The biggest problem is material quality. The fact that usually during times of war, your most expert workers are usually hired into armies because they are the quickest to learn and they are the most trainable. So you have to bring in people who are less good at that, or women or old people. Just anyone you can get to cram in. Uh,
Yeah.
as for the air service example, another big problem is they got such a large air force by importing primarily from a mixture of French, German, and British manufacturers, in particular engines. Engines were mostly German. So, yeah, when you mobilize to try to stop Austria-Hungary and Germany tells you that you're going to go to war, they're going to go to war with you, and you ignore them, and they declare on you.
Because you want the war, because you think it will be a quick war, because the French are on your side, and
Historically, Wilhelm
there's
II was known to make a lot of aggressive motions, but he always would back down usually, like he did this in
usually
Morocco.
there's that, but it was more in this case of the Russians were expecting a very quick war because they thought that the entire army would be fighting France, and they could just overwhelm the uh, the Germans, and then the Austrians would be forced
Yeah,
to
that was
peace.
something that they thought. They thought that because this is actually based on the German strategy. The German strategy was try to knock out France as soon as possible. This is actually what Hitler would do later on. Knock them out as quickly as you can, then pivot towards Russia because the German strategic thinking at the time, especially in the 1900s, was Russia's mobilizations tables means that they're going to do it very slowly. So while they can potentially be a sledgehammer, it will take them months to get organized.
And then the Russians surprised everybody by actually somehow mobilizing faster than expected.
Which is a combination of Stolypin's industrial reforms as well as just army reform in general.
Yeah, like even the Russians were like, "Oh shit, we've got our army ready already. Damn, nice, we're
Which
great."
caused, funnily
And
enough, Wilhelm actually panicked, and this is actually why they
yes,
were stopped at the Marne and pulled.
arguably it was why they were stuck with the Marne because he immediately pulled the realization that the Russians were moving way ahead of schedule meant that they had to make a choice, which was either risk losing Königsberg, which was just simply intolerable as a concept, or risks, or basically like we can how much can you spare from France? And they took what basically the generals estimated they could spare from France, and they shipped them immediately across Germany.
Well, the other
Right?
factor is again Kaiser Wilhelm being somewhat indecisive. He actually also changed his mind partially at the last minute and pulled some back.
Yeah,
That's
it got
kind
a
of
little bit
his
weird.
that's kind of his personality in a nutshell. Very dynamic, very ambitious, very energetic, but also very uncertain. He often double
Yes,
thought himself quite a bit.
yes, and then it gets into the real fun bit of this, which is that then some random German commander manages to run in circles around two entire Russian armies to the point where one of the Russian generals fucking shoots himself in the woods. Uh,
Yes, yes, that happened. Well, actually, it
and
wasn't just the Russian. It wasn't just a Russian general. I believe it was also the Russian air marshal that commanded the air service there too.
I can't remember, but also the wolves killed a
They
bunch of
lost
people.
like some. Oh no, I'm confusing that with World War II, where the
Yeah, they
Soviet
also
air
had a
marshal ended himself because he lost 90% of the Russian air force in the first 2 days.
yeah. The really funny one though is the fact that the Russians were also then attacked by wolves on the retreat, so it went a little
Yeah, that
nuts.
happened. That was basically after Tannenberg, things began to fall apart. The
Things
East.
went bad.
Oh,
Things went really bad.
oh
The
yeah,
only
all's
reason the
quiet on
war
the
wasn't
Western
over
Front.
in less than
All's quiet
the
on
only
the
reason
Western Front with your fucking artillery. Meanwhile, in the East.
it's absolutely nuts. The only reason why the war wasn't over on the east in like 6 months was the Austro-Hungarians were absolutely useless. Like just completely useless.
So here's the thing: Russia and actually the Austrian Empire, funnily enough, both realized their mistakes. The Austro-Hungarians realized them a little earlier, actually, mainly because of
Because
their
they got their
overgrowth,
shit wrecked by fucking Serbia.
and Prussia. They went through two periods of reform: one immediately after the Brother War, and then one after they failed to crush Serbia, because Serbia actually was able to kick their ass. This actually happened. One of the funniest moments was I believe Serbians actually sent scouts to sow discord during a battle, and it culminated in I think 3 different regiments shooting at each other because one of them also happened to speak, in this case, Croat, which sounded very similar to Serbian. Uh,
Oh,
During that fight, I believe 5,000 died, and the Austrians lost against Austria.
that's a different battle that involves some alcohol and some panic that you're thinking of. Anyway,
Yeah.
the theme and the mood here are kind of important. So basically put, when Petrograd has the Tsar fall, the demons in Russia start to see a couple of things. There's a few that are going, oh, this is like what we want to do. This is they're trying to create their hell on earth.
Actually,
Uh,
the best way to describe the Master's tools is it is a modern twist on the Constantinople setting in some respects.
it is very similar to the Constantinople setting, but I think that this is actually a little bit better. Also, it
It's a
has a
little bit better. It's a little easier to understand, and the mood and tone is a lot better.
also I do love that they have the John Reed quote, the 58th Division, where it's like the 10 days that shook the world, which is a fantastic read into like the early attitude of the revolution. Uh, but then we kind of get into some other stuff that was going on. So basically, put names. Slavic names are fucking hard and stupid because of how the language is constructed, combined with the Cyrillic alphabet, combined with like just cultural backlog, basically the way to put it. So like
Don't forget the
Lenin,
patronymics.
yes. So for example, Lenin, Vladimir Ilyich Leninov, where Lenin is basically an assumed name because it's a fucking nightmare to have some of these people's names written down. You also get kind of into a bit of a thing where it's like they mentioned, of course, Bolsheviks are starting to rise in power. There's not just the Bolsheviks, there's the Mensheviks, there's the left SRs, the right SRs, the blacks, the greens, the whites, about 3 different flavors of whites, actually,
Yep. Also, don't
which were all
also
fighting each other, by the way,
yeah.
because they all thought that the rest of them were the ones that caused the revolution.
One
So that's fun.
one of the funniest things is one of the white factions was also socialist. I believe it was the Omsk Directorate.
Yeah. Like
It
when
was
we say the
wild.
Russian Civil War is a complicated topic that people kind of gloss over into like, oh, it was just the communists doing horrible
It was the
things and blah blah
communists
blah.
versus the anti-communists, and the
It was the
communists.
Jews. Like things like that where it's like, no, no, it was not. There's a lot of the reason why there's a lot of Jews, for example, in the Bolshevik movement, is because the not the Soviet government, the Russian government was horrifically oppressive to Jews.
Oh yeah,
So
they
any
would
sort
use
of
the
revolutionary organization was often had a lot of Jews in it because they fucking hated the Tsar.
yeah, legitimately the Jeka was often used to send to aid in pogroms alongside the Black Hundreds, which was a faction among Russian nobles that were very pro-nationalist. And
Basically paramilitary brown shirts. Think of them that way.
half paramilitary brown shirts, half John Bircher Society, half rich person's club that has a portrait of. In this case, it would be like a portrait of George Washington or like a founding father, or like
Yeah,
or like Winston Churchill if you want to be like truly English and want to and stick it to India.
right. And we get, of course, into the talk about like the years. The fact is that Russia is kind of getting into a weird spot because they were still on, well, the Julian calendar at this time rather than the Gregorian, which everyone else was using
That's why their
in
October
Europe.
Revolution is technically in November.
Yeah, it gets really weird.
Oh, and don't forget the February Revolution, I believe, which
It's
happened in
also,
March.
I think, yeah, basically it gets a little
Oh,
wonky.
and like to give you an idea on how complicated the Russian Civil War is, we didn't even get to the time a bunch of Czechs and Slovaks commandeered a couple of boats to fight on Lake Baikal to make their way back home, and they actually won a naval battle.
Yeah, again, nuts. But right,
They
Tunguska
legitimately
then.
had to they stole an armored train and drove like did a modern Xenophon's 10,000 through all of Siberia, all of the Volga region, just to make it back home to the recently formed Czechoslovakia.
Yeah, there's also, of course, the Tunguska event, which is kind of an interesting one. They, of course, talk about this. It's a fun little bit. 30 megaton TNT uh, equivalent explosion over the Podmakanaya or Tunguska River Basin. Uh, Basically, no fatalities, which was lucky. It took until 1927 for an official expedition, and the Soviets finally looked for it because they were looking for any kind of like iron ore or something that might have been left by a meteor strike. And no, it's an airburst. It was really weird, and the scorched trees were all over the place, and it was just a weird area. They talk about it where they go that whatever the fuck this was meant to be hitting Petrograd, probably from the God Machine, and it fucked up. Which then leads into kind of like, was this an attempt to obliterate Petrograd or an attempt to obliterate infrastructure? So demons in Petrograd know about Tunguska at this point in time, and they are incredibly fucking paranoid.
Actually, this is something that I really feel is something you have to know about demons if you're not familiar with how the Unchained work. They very much are in the Pepe Sylvia mindset with the conspiracy boards.
Yes, because they have to be. Everything is a plot against them by the God Machine, which controls everything, which is this, idiot blind God gibbering behind the controls of the universe and all that sort of shit. So if you want to do like a lot of like existential horror shit, Demon's not a bad game for it, really.
Like if you ever want to
Um,
do a paranoid they're out to get you game, actually if you want to run paranoia but you don't want to deal with that system, you can just use demon.
just use Demon and just use the setting. We'll get to that. But right, the
But yeah,
Russia,
there's a lot of terms you need to know. Anarchism was pretty popular at this time period.
yes,
The bourgeoisie. This is, in Marxist terms refers to In this case, it would be the modern upward mobile capitalist class, kind of more your merchants, your upward mobility. They're relatively wealthy, but they are not blooded by feudalism. If you're wondering, Marx basically documented that what happened was that they committed their own revolution. That's what the toppling of the toppling of monarchism, the toppling of absolute monarchy was. Like the French Revolution is a good example of a bourgeois revolution. It massively increased the rights and abilities of those, but they in turn also began using oppression themselves. That's kind of his point of view,
Yeah.
and that's
So
something you
obviously, we need
kind
to
of have
hand it
to
over to the
understand.
people to have a dictatorship to eliminate all class, which will then create a utopia. Kinda.
Which that's not actually what he was talking about. He did say that was a possible path though, because he described that his ideas were more for areas that were much more developed industrially and had a lot larger of a worker component.
Yeah. And a lot of the other things is that you have to understand Marxism at this time in thought, in like political thought and in economic thought and all this is actually a very new thing. Like, yes, he published his theories in what was it, the 1860s.
1850s, 1860s. He wrote stuff like Das Kapital, which is then the Communist
That's
Manifesto.
yes. You have to
Eh,
understand that with Russia modernizing, stuff like that was considered very popular because it was this Western scientific thought that would bring Russia forward out of this dark, backwardness that was at least the intellectuals of Russia. So there was a lot of like almost every sort of radical theory you could imagine was getting a lot of traction in Russia because
because
there
in
was some.
Russia there was not a lot of social upward mobility. It's only during the time of Alexander II and actually a couple of his earlier predecessors that actually made the opportunity. The middle class, which were usually primarily merchants, bankers, relatively wealthy farmers, these would be the people that could get their hands on it. On top of that, it also combined with because Russia had its own native socialist and anarchist movement. In fact, actually, one of the founding fathers of major anarchist branches is Mikhail Bakunin, who is completely insane, but a lot of anarchist thoughts actually have its origins in Russia. So
Yeah.
they had their own traditions. They had a lot of their own philosophers on this, and then Marx came in, and this is actually where they begin intermingling with ideas.
Right. Which then leads, of course, to the Leninist school of thought, which is different than Marxist Leninism, but we're not getting into the fucking weeds on that.
Yeah, like
Uh,
in short, I'll describe. There was a variety of, funnily enough, Russian nihilist movements, positive and negative nihilist movements, anarchist movements, and what happened is when Marx became relatively popular, not just harder core forms of communism and socialism, but social democracy itself as a concept as well, especially
yeah,
because of the aborted reforms of Alexander II, which were ended legitimately because of anarchists blew them up.
yeah, it's kind of funny that way.
The best part
Uh,
is apparently his own corpse actually had documentation about because he was actually setting up a Duma. He was going to
yeah,
announce the creation of a Duma, which
yeah,
was a building off of the Zemstvo because that's another term, Zemstvo. There were attempts to provide electoral and initiative among the lower ranking population to reform Russia. It just never got very far because the main reform guy got killed. He wasn't perfect. He actually had a lot of failures in his own right. He did under his reign. There were pogroms, for example. There still were.
yeah,
Also during his reign, yeah, he freed the serfs. You wanted they also he also did force them to pay an 80-year loan to their original landlords.
yeah. So yeah, they also talk, of course, about the Soviet, which was this basically these council movements that were across Russia. That's where the term the Soviet comes from. The Soviet Union is literally a bunch of these little groups that got together and did stuff. So that's why it's called the Soviet Union.
There's actually a saying about Russia that every time something good could happen to Russia, the phrase "and then
It,
it gets worse"
it's
immediately
worse
rolls in.
happens, yes. So Russia, of course, is they even explain the feudalism thing if you scroll down
Oh yeah.
with past the Tunguska event, which is what I was talking about there, and
Yep,
then
serfdom. Russia was the last of the essentially European powers. Although, actually, this is another fun thing about Russia. There is actually a philosophical movement that formed during this time period as they colonized Siberia. That is called Eurasianism, which is the belief that Russia is actually more akin and more tied to Asia than it is to Europe. It's the link between two worlds. Um, it's still around in the modern day in the form of one of their many iterations of what's essentially fascism, but not quite, under the idiot known as Alexander Dugin. You know, the guy who wants to go into a final cultural war with America to destroy the
Oh,
the disgusting Anglo-Saxon facilocracy.
yeah. Then we, of course, they even talk about the 1905 revolution. Uh,
Russia got its shit beat. People began starving because. So here's the thing: Russian farms were horribly inefficient. This is actually why collectivization actually worked for them.
yes, this is one of those weird things. No, yes, the forced collectivization was a problem, but the previous collectivizations actually improved Russian agriculture considerably
Mainly because the
because they
way
usually
land was
happened.
parceled was very
Yes,
different.
yes, because in the areas where it was the most profitable, which was the more free Western style farming out in like Ukraine and in Poland and places like that, yeah, that worked perfectly fine. But the problem with that compared to the systems that were in Russia at the time, like Russia proper, that just was not going to work.
Well,
There were a couple of
it
reasons
also
for
helped
this.
that the Ukraine, it's called the Black Land for a reason.
Yeah, but okay, but the reason why I'm saying that this is why the collectivization worked as much as it did is that the landlords in Russia were not going to just hand out parcels to single people of land, like a single household kind of area. No, they weren't going to do that. So that's not going to happen. So you got that kind of method of farming kind of out the window. The landlords don't want that; they're not going to do
Yep, they're
it.
not going to apportion, especially since they've lost all their serfs now. Why would they benefit them at all?
Why would they? They would not benefit from having less tenants. Of course,
It's the
this
same
is
reason
completely
why
fucking wrong.
it's the
But
same reason why the Great Hunger in Ireland happened. So here's the cursed
yeah,
thing: the Great Hunger in Ireland, Ireland exported fuckloads of wheat, massive amounts of wheat, because
yep,
that's what the landlords demanded and that's what was good on the market. The potatoes were what they could subsistence grow because what potatoes do is they actually allow you freedom.
yeah,
Because weight per weight, potatoes give you the most amount of nutrition, calories, and everything you need out of all of the proper cereal grains. Essentially, it's not a cereal, but it's like part of the starch group. So that's how they were able to survive even with those horrible conditions. The blight killed their only option, and the British landlords, the Anglo-Irish landlords, went, well, you know, I could
no,
lower,
you
no,
need to
no,
sell the wheat.
I could lower profitability by as low as 4%. That's all they had to do is basically stop exporting like 4% of their grain, and it would have stopped
No,
most of the famine.
and the same thing happened in Russia as well. There was a massive famine. I want to say in the 1880s,
Oh, they Russia
1890s.
went through like famines every 15 years.
Yes. So this is one of those things where it's like you can ding the Soviets for a lot of shit, but the problem of famines in Russia was something that was around way before them. They just made it worse
Well, it's
because of the forced collectivization,
Well, not
which
only that, but
they
Russia, keep in mind that Russian industry was really poor. They didn't have many options to export. Russia at this time period, and even in the Soviet Union period, like up until like the 1930s, they actually did not really have their own native aluminum processing plants. So they had to import that stuff. That's how like their industry was just that lagging, that poor, that lacking.
yeah.
So
Some of that's from
they
the
didn't.
revolution, some of that's from the Tsarist era stuff, some of that's
Well, no,
just
some of it's just from Russia in general because of the
yeah.
lack
I
of.
was going to say like Russia in general is kind of the reason for it. But
But
yes,
because of that,
they
grain's one of their really few exports that actually made money.
right.
So they would willingly just kind of raid winter. This is something that Russia would do, and what the Soviets definitely did. They would raid winter caches. Basically, they would raid granaries and take the winter seed as well because they need to keep their margins going. It's the only way their budget works. And tens of thousands just starved to death. And now they're joining the Social Revolutionary Party, a Democratic Party.
Yep.
And good. They split up now because there's this hard-headed guy named Lenin who refuses to compromise on a single fucking thing. Oh no, no, they established a workers' council in the capital and in Leningrad. I mean,
Yep.
and in St.
Anyway, Great
Petersburg.
War happens. Yeah, they go and talk about all this, and it's just
Russia
like
gets fucking wrecked.
Russia gets absolutely fucking bodied.
Like, yeah, they did
The
okay against Austria-Hungary because they were even
It's
worse.
fucking Austria-Hungary, but they go and they talk about like the Brusilov offensive in 1916. Limited success. It still cost them 1 million men.
Oh, did they talk
They
about
say
the
that
time
demons
that
sort of
did they talk about the time Tsarniki decided to show up to the front line and replace the actual commander?
no, but they do talk a bit about like
He wasn't a very good commander.
they
His
talk about
younger
the
brother
demons
Michael
having
was, but he wasn't.
yeah they do have some talking about how like the when it comes to the Russian effort in the war was somewhat sabotaged by the demons because well that's what they do shit like that.
Oh yeah.
They then go, of course, like they talk about how like Russian procurement was so bad so many people didn't have rifles, which was true. This is actually more true in World War I than it was in World War II.
Because in World War
In
II,
world
they had the rifles. It was a combination of they lacked a combination of ammunition, but also just they couldn't
Yeah,
support them to the front.
yeah, the main
Like,
issue that
you were
they had
usually
in
guaranteed a rifle and maybe a clip of
ammunition
ammo. But what would
ammunition was
happen?
the
What would
the issue.
happen
uh,
is the
yeah,
trains that were supplying you more, they were lagged behind a couple cities back.
right. The again the World War II Russian army a lot better logistically than the World War I Russian army,
The reason
but
it
that's
did so
still not
shittily,
saying a
though,
lot.
well, the reason they did so shittily too is Stalin legitimately had them doing an exercise right at the front line to try to deter Hitler from invading.
It's like let's move all of our stocks forward as like a precaution and try to not completely antagonize them, but also put on a show of force because we can trust Hitler.
As we're going
He's
through
done
a
nothing wrong.
as we're going through a military reorganization, and we have most of our Air Force lined up in pretty row. By the way, the Russian Air Force history is very fun to learn about. Mainly
Yeah,
because they constantly were struggling to make new designs, mainly because of the just the nature of Russian industry. It's mostly owned by the state, even like during the Tsar's time. If it was an industry, it was usually owned by a nobleman or a friend of the nobleman.
yeah. So we also then get into, of course, they're talking about the absolute fucking shit show that is the wartime stuff in there. And of course, they talk about the czarist powers are kind of in trouble. They've got these agencies are all banding together, and in St. Petersburg going completely nuts.
Oh, and if you're wondering
There's
what
a
an agency is, so Organization, the Unchained. Just because not everyone's familiar with Descent, they might be more familiar with Fallen.
yeah,
So, when a group of demons get together, they're called a ring. The larger the ring, the more unstable it usually is because demons are by their nature self-interested. But what happens?
self-interested and paranoid as fuck.
So what happens is though, sometimes the ring will either get so large, or what will happen is multiple rings will get together to try to fuck over the god machine or try to create their version of paradise. That they form what is called an agency, which those are rare. They're the demon equivalent of a hunter conspiracy. You don't usually find a lot of them. They're not very stable because it's just the nature of the beast. Not those beasts. They're busy committing horrible crimes in the Reconstruction era.
Yeah. So the next step, of course, is the revolution kind of itself. They talk a bit, of course, about Rasputin. They talk about how Alexei's hemophilia is a major problem.
Uh,
There's also
did they make
the
Rasputin
demons.
mildly supernatural? Because he
I
wasn't.
mean, possibly
I mean, he did allegedly fix the worst elements of his hemophilia.
a
It's
lot of
actually
that might have just been that he simply told them stop giving the kid aspirin,
that's literally what happened.
which
Yeah,
which is what. Yeah, they were giving aspirin to a hemophiliac.
mainly for pain relief.
Well, also because aspirin at the time was kind of considered a miracle drug.
Well, yeah,
So,
because it also could bust. I mean, it's also known as a mild clot buster. It's actually useful if you.
well, yes, it's useful as a blood thinner. That's why it's used for like people with heart problems sometimes, where it's like because it'll help thin the blood
But
out.
you don't have a clot factor if you're a hemophiliac.
Right.
But yeah, Rasputin, he was a weird guy. Usually didn't shower. Claimed he could hypnotize people. Basically plowed any woman that came his way. Had a weird cult
Yeah.
of nymphos. Weird, basically sex Christian cult. It was an
Also,
embarrassment. In a more peaceful Russian Empire, this would have just been funny. But they're in the middle of a war. And when Nicky went off to wear his uniform and basically fuck up every Russian offensive because he's even more incompetent than the guy he replaced because he's the czar,
yeah.
you have to do what he says. Uh, you not only have weird hobo mystic man who claims he can cure you by staring at you with hypnosis, but his very German and proud of her ethnicity wife. She did not enjoy having to fight Germany. She actually was disappointed in Willie for doing this.
Right. So they finally get into this where they talk about, of course, the killing of Rasputin, where they used terrible poison.
Well, no, no,
They
no, no. The,
forgot
the
that he's
best
wearing
part.
a bunch of heavy clothing, so they're literally trying to stab him to death, where he's essentially wearing armor. And then on top of all that, they're using underpowered cartridges when they're trying to shoot the man
Yup.
with thick clothing. So no wonder they don't fucking kill
No,
him.
you forget the best part. The reason the poison was also neutralized by being put into a dessert because that specific poison is partially neutralized in the presence of sugar.
Yeah.
And he ate like a whole fucking cake of it.
Yeah, it's this really just like
They were just so
amazing.
incompetent, and they were screaming because they're like, "Oh my god, he has magic powers! Kill him!"
It's like, no, you're just really fucking shitty at killing people.
Well, to be
Like,
fair,
just
they're
take
the
him out
czar.
behind the shed and fucking unload your fucking revolver into the back of his head.
to
Not,
be
oh, let's poison him.
to
Like,
be
what the
fair,
fuck?
they're Tsar Nicholas's nephews. They're not very
That's
smart.
that
They
is true.
they were
That is true.
those two were known to not actually be that smart.
Just good
Like
God,
in
it is
court,
one
they
of the
were known as
most.
kind of half-witted.
It is one of the dumbest assassinations in history.
No, the best
Just
part is
flat
they
out.
wrap him in the thing, and yeah, he was still alive. The only reason he died is
There's
he
the rumor
transferred.
is that he was still alive, that he drowned. I'm not 100% sure on that one.
It's based on the fact that like he was partially unwound from the carpet, and it was very clear there was like some form of motion or struggle.
Yeah, that could have just easily been like muscle spasms, though.
Either way,
Either way,
there's
yeah,
a reason why
Rasputin dies.
there's a reason why the old world of darkness had Rasputin be everywhere.
Yes. So that, of course, then comes the revolution. So there's a lot of shit going on. Lvov, that was it. Prince Lvov.
Oh yeah,
That was
Georgy Lvov.
the guy that was doing a lot of the reform efforts before. So the Duma tries to take over the government. There's a lot of issues with what is the constitution going to be like? What are the parties going to be like? Can we ban people? The czarists are already sabotaging it from the inside, by the way. Um,
Oh yeah,
which
especially the
is
military.
Yes. This is something to remember, is that a lot of the reason why the original government fails is not because the communists are getting power or like with political opinion. It's that the monarchists are deliberately sabotaging the democratic movement the best they can.
Well, no, no,
It
actually,
is,
no, no. There's two aspects. There's three aspects actually. Monarchists were trying to sabotage, and actually, you had several generals like Kornilov plotting an actual coup. That's one aspect. You had their idiotic decision to try to stick it through to the end with the war, that by this
yeah, rather
point
than
was
tap
completely
out and
unpopular.
stabilize the situation. Yeah.
And last but not least, you had Alexander Kerensky, who is basically playing the Game of Thrones, essentially wheeling and dealing and fucking over people for short-term gains.
Yes. Oh, I should also mention that the entire reason why they didn't pull out of the war is because they were worried the British would try to invade them to take back their money, because Russia was
Which
horrifically in debt.
which let's be fair, that is something that the British would have done. Like
Yes.
let's be
So
kind to them. There that does make
they had a
sense.
reason for doing this. They had a reason for sticking in the war how they did. The main issue, though, is that rather than do the smart thing and arguably go like, can we get a ceasefire for like five minutes here, Germany? Like, you won't attack, we won't attack. We're still in the war, guys. We haven't signed a peace. Just a temporary ceasefire. They
Well, that's actually one more mistake. The main, I believe this is the Brusilov. This is not the Brusilov, or was that before?
Brusilov was before this,
They had the oh yeah, it was the Lvov offensive. There was a big push that Russia tried, and I
and
think it
absolutely failed.
well it was I think partially so that when they tried to talk about a ceasefire, that they would have better terms,
Yes,
and
which
they
only
got
works when
fucked.
you're actually able to push forward, which at this point the Russian army was not capable of actually doing, as anyone in the military with half a brain knew, which was why there was so much desertion and why by soldiers Soviets were forming out in the front,
Which, speaking of
where
which, so you have the Duma, which is actually a complete nightmare rat's fucking nest. You actually
yes,
had members of the Mensheviks. You actually had some of the SRs that would also
yes,
form Soviets in it. You had the cadets, Trudoviks, but then you also had the Black Hundreds legitimately formed a party during this time.
yes, and you can kind of see where this whole idea of let's experiment with democracy in
they're
the middle of a war.
squabbling. They're squabbling, and here's the best part: throughout it all, people are also listening to the Soviets. Soviets actually first existed in 1905, mainly in the
Yes.
aftermath of the 1905 revolutions. They were reformed. Funnily enough, Leon Trotsky was the guy who kind of came up with this concept.
Yes, so the worker Soviets are kind of this thing that starts forming in St. Petersburg because, quite
See,
frankly, the central government is fucking gone. The riots inside of Petrograd have basically ended it.
and on top of
The
that, a lot of the Petrograd is one of the most industrialized cities besides Moscow. Moscow also had its own Soviet. What would
Yes,
happen is they would also come up with laws and ideas to aid the worker and aid the common man. And what would happen is they would actually butt heads with the Duma, who would also have their own law and ideas, and they wouldn't talk to each other. That's the other thing. They refused to actually talk to each other at all. Mainly because whenever the Mensheviks or any other SRs would show up, they were basically kicked out.
yes. So
Although
they
some of them
also
legitimately just refused to even show up at all, even if they were elected.
yes, they did. There's a lot of that. So they go into the political parties, which I fucking love on the next page.
Oh, it's
Uh,
yeah. Let's go off how confusing
this
this
is
is.
this is not even the full list, by the way.
This is simplified.
There's the Bolsheviks and the Mensheviks, which are both from the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, which are communists, but also are related to the Green Movement, which is really the peasant agricultural socialist revolution, which is also not actually a real organized movement. It's a bunch of peasants who don't know anything about anything else going on, are like, you know what? Fuck the landlords. We're just going to kill them all.
Oh,
Because that's
also,
what communism is, I
some of them
guess.
weren't even. Also, some of them weren't actually communists. Some were just pure socialists.
Yeah. Then you had the Socialist Revolutionary Party, which was different because it followed pure Marxist philosophy and not the vanguard revolutionaryism that was Lenin's sort of trademark.
Well, neither did the
He's the first,
Mensheviks. Basically, the Mensheviks were more radical. They were more akin, not to a vanguard party. Theirs is more of a full-on socialism.
yeah,
Theirs would be more like, well, they never actually had a chance to kind of realize their ideas, but it would have been more left than, say, a social democratic movement.
yeah.
We don't really know how it appeared, but basically, they were socialist and actually likely communists in a lot of ways.
And then it gets
Quite a few of them were.
weirder. And then it gets weirder, as I've said before. So the next group
The SRs were
is
more socialist, social democrats, also anarchists. They had quite a few of
also
them
anarchists. As I
members.
said, there were so many various socialist revolutionary parties that it's really hard to go into all of them. That's why we have the right SRs and the left SRs because there are so many goddamn parties.
Also, funnily enough, both left SRs and right SRs would join several white movements, as well as join, well, not the right. The rights wouldn't join the Bolsheviks, but the lefts also joined them too.
Yeah, it gets weird. So
The lefts actually would fight each other during the Russian Civil War. Uh,
yes,
yeah.
there's a lot of that going on. Then we get to the Constitutional Democratic Party, also known as the Cadets, which was more of like the we should just try this whole like constitutional monarchy thing.
So the
And
cadet movement is a somewhat older faction. It's from the same time period as the original Russian Social Democratic
right,
Labor Party. It's from around the same idea. They mostly were formed from those who were friends and supporters of Alexander II.
yeah. there's two kind of branches of these guys. There's the let's do a completely puppet head king, like the British sort of have going on, and then there's the let's just get rid of the monarchy and just demote him to like I don't know a duke or something, and then just kind of open up the franchise to everyone and go for full republic.
This is
There's a
partially
lot
why the
of
Duma failed because the cadets, while having a larger components than most,
they were
yeah,
very fractured. They there was a lot of debate about what kind of republic should we have. Should it be like this, that, the other thing? Then, of course, there's the Union of October 17th, which is the constitutional monarchists,
these would
which
be.
were the ones that wanted the more of like a that the czar would have actual power,
It was
but
closer
not
to
like a
Belgium or
lot of power.
Germany.
Yes, more of like a German style or Prussian style sort of constitution where it's like the king can veto a bunch of shit. And
Although they were also split because there were three flavors of
yes,
Octoberists, from what I recall.
yes, there were.
There
So
was
as
the
we
ones
said,
most like the cadets, where they actually were more okay with them having minor executive powers, but were still essentially a
like
figurehead.
basically the equivalent of like the king has to go in and say Parliament is in session, and then it's in session, and then
Or
he has
Parliament
to
is
by
dissolved
legally,
because you can't because of motion of no confidence, or you are
yeah,
clearly unpopular. We're holding a snap election.
yeah, like that sort of power for the king, where it's not really power, but it's still some say in the government.
Then there's the
Um,
Prussian monarchist ones, and then there's the ones that only said they were democratic, but in reality, they actually completely and absolutely despised everything about this and were low key plotting to overthrow the Duma.
yeah, there's so many of these groups, as we said before. And that's not, this is not even getting into the really weird, out there, wonky ones.
Yeah, we haven't even
That,
covered the variety of the green armies, the black armies, because there were more than one black army.
yeah, there were several different black armies. There's also the various nationalist groups,
Oh
some of
yeah,
which
like
were okay with being part of Russia, but wanted autonomy, like certain areas in like the Belarus.
oh,
Certain Ukrainian groups wanted more like just local rule, but
there
will
was
still be
also an
part of Russia.
Azerbaijani socialist movement that actually was
Yes, there
tied to the
was.
Persian socialist movement of the time period.
As we said, the Russian Civil War is an insanely complicated affair.
Also,
Uh,
don't forget that the ally, like, what was it? I think the Emir of Bukhara actually tried to declare independence again.
yeah, there's a lot of this. So they talk about this whole like kind of weird shit that's going on, the dual power where it's like the Soviet is in power technically, but so is the Duma.
They no, they there was never any agreement. They basically kept
Yeah.
saying the other was illegitimate.
Yes. Then of course they're talking about the demons were also kind of doing a little bit nuts where they're divided as well. There's a lot of
Well, yeah, because
talking about that.
this is the collapse of infrastructure, like clear infrastructure that the God Machine has already built it. Because again, Leningrad, well, St. Petersburg and Moscow, because it's not Leningrad yet.
Yeah,
Both of
so
them are
when the
highly
Tsar
developed cities.
yeah, so when the Tsar gets overthrown, the demons are already fighting each other, and then the hunters angels come in too, and it gets nuts. Then Lenin returns. Lenin kind of basically his big his programs are extreme. He one of the things I'll give Lenin this. He could tell you exactly what he wanted to do, and for the most part, he stuck to it. All power to the Soviets. With peace, land, and bread. We're going to
Peaceland and
get rid
Bread's
of
actually a lie because he also coined wartime war communism. Remember that?
yeah, kind of a lie. I mean, the idea is basically like we're going to do land reform, we're going to try to get peace, and we're going to fix the farming.
Well,
So
congratulations, Lenin. You're running a complete dumpster fire that's not getting turned off. It's still burning. What
yeah,
now?
what now? So this
Strokes
is where
out
we
and
get into the
dies.
yes, this is kind of one of the things with like the July days, where this time this 8 month period where there is the provisional Russian government, which is trying to delay a constitutional assembly because they know that they'll lose a general election and be out of power or have to compromise with these either the SRs or the Bolsheviks in order to form a government. And the Mensheviks themselves are also fractured as well. There's a lot of shit going on.
Like during
Um,
this time period, actually, this is when Trotsky, he was a Menshevik. He actually left the party
yeah,
and joined the
Trotsky left the
Bolsheviks during
Mensheviks
this
because
period.
he's like, you're not doing anything. You're just sitting around here
No,
talking.
no, you're
Do
not doing
something.
anything, and you're letting more Russians die to imperialist aggression. Because
Yeah,
Trotsky was actually anti-war, but he wasn't exactly pro overthrowing the government until they absolutely failed during the July days.
yeah. So basically, the July days kind of the provisional government and the Soviet kind of joins together, but not really. It gets weird, and then we get the Kornilov affair where Kerensky tries to coup the government,
Well, actually, no,
and
Kornilov tries first, and then Kerensky.
well, basically that's the thing. It's like who fucking knows?
Well, no, no, that's the
Because
best
they
part. It
blame
was
each
both
other
of
about
them.
it.
It was both of
Yeah,
them.
they're both trying to coup the government, and they both claim that the other one is trying to coup the government, and they
But
both claim that
because
they didn't want
Kornilov
to coup the
tried
government.
first, Kerensky was able to beat him because he pulled the trick, because he basically came off worse. Also, Kerensky
Yeah,
allied. Oh, this is the best part. Kerensky actually freed most of the Bolsheviks that were in prison during this time.
yes, he did because he's like, we need bodies on the streets. Just give them their fucking revolvers and send them out
He
to hold the
armed them,
barricades.
and then on top
Yes,
of
he did.
that, empowered the unions. He actually was like, "Go ahead, wreck the railroads," and like
Wreck
this
the
was their
railroads. It will
finest
stop the
hour.
army from getting into the city, which was what happened because the Soviet Railroad Union basically had control of over all the trains because they're the only ones who knew how to use them. I am serious, by
Yep.
the way. This is it's absolutely fucking insane. But that's the truth of it. This also then gets into the next bit where it's like they're talking about the back door of like the Winter Palace, which is I love this whole section because it's a fun bit of talking about how you could integrate the demons into some of these events.
Well, actually, before we do, as for demons themselves, the demons divisions are actually between two aspects. There's the Camellia Group, which is the one of the oldest agencies. They are very much pro-monarchist. They would be eventually part of the Whites. And then you have the
Yeah,
Unchained Soviet, which is its own Soviet for the demons. Basically, it is
because
a ring at this
yeah.
point, and it becomes an agency for a while.
So I kind of like this one too. So basically, they talk about the Winter Palace where they say, "Oh, it's a key bit." They stage it again in the film October, and it confuses the historical stuff of everyone because the Soviets want the Revolution of February and the Revolution of October to be basically the same thing. They don't want to pretend that there was another government before because that government was illegitimate. It didn't matter. Didn't count. That wasn't that sort of thing.
Yep. Which was something that was very commonly done by the Soviets at this time period.
It was also very commonly done in basically every revolutionary government ever, including the American Revolution. We like to try to downplay Benedict Arnold, for example. Um,
After he was routinely fucked over by Continental Congress.
and we do a lot of that where we try to pretend that Washington was actually brilliant and not completely desperate when it came to the Trenton raid. Um, there's the back door of the Winter Palace. I talk about there wasn't one. Then the Revolution did it, where there's an angel that built the palace. And that's what let them in. There's also the Red Guard was part of the was in there. So the one of the Unchained Soviet broke in and killed heads of the Camilla group.
Which,
Uh,
if you're wondering why, I believe this one in particular has to do with how quickly the Winter Palace collapsed, because there was
yes,
actually, it was called the Brigade of Death, which was a mostly all women's brigade of essentially volunteers to defend the government. They immediately surrendered.
yes. There's a few other things with that too, where a lot of it was also that if I remember correctly, it was like they showed up and they were like, "Oh, we don't actually have any ammunition."
That
They
was the
didn't give
big
us
reason
any.
they surrendered.
Yeah, they didn't actually give the fucking guards of the palace any ammunition, and they realized that they didn't have any, and they're like, "Oh, um,
They were also
yeah, I,
they were
I guess
also
we're
just
picking
given that
sides."
name for reputation only.
Yeah, they were. So then they basically just swapped sides. This happened a lot actually in the Russian Civil War, where you'd have entire units basically swap between one group or another, especially in the early days of it, based on like what was going on. It's very Chinese Civil War in that way.
Oh yeah,
But
like legitimately, one of the funniest is I think it was either Estonia or there was like an entire army that eventually that started Bolshevik, but then swapped as soon as either Latvia or Estonia became free, and basically
Yeah, they
ditched the
declared independence and
Bolsheviks.
they're like, oh, yeah, because they've declared independence, obviously we're going to back our national government over the Soviet government unless the Soviet government recognizes our national government.
And when they didn't, they fucked off.
Yeah, because reasons, basically.
Uh,
Then it
this
gets
this
kind of
happened
into,
repeatedly. The Czechoslovak Legion's one of the funniest because I believe if I recall, they have fought both for the whites and for the reds, all just to get home because
yeah,
they were
basically
strapped
they
out
were
in
nominally
Vladivostok.
in they because they were a legion that was fighting in Russia on behalf of the Russian government because they were fighting the Austro-Hungarians. So this meant that the whites didn't really trust them. And so when the revolution started, they're kind of in a bit of a lurch. So they start moving towards the east because the Soviets are saying, "Yes, brothers, comrades in arms, rally to us." And then the issue is that the Soviet governments that are getting in contact with these guys are like, they're a little too, not really with the program, with the revolution, because they're talking about things like maybe a representative democracy or a constitutional monarchy or things like that. Because remember, they were fighting for the czar, so lock them down and don't let them leave. Which is what they told railway workers for a while, and then eventually the Czechoslovakian Legion kind of figured out that they are possibly about to get attacked because they can't be trusted. So they then steal trains and start going east.
They also then later
Which
on steal a bunch of gunboats to cross Lake
yes,
Baikal, actually fight and defeat the Red Navy.
yes, they were fighting both like random ass bandit militias, various Soviet Union, like various Soviet governments, militia groups on both sides. It was an absolutely insane thing. Eventually, they were basically just fighting only the Reds because that was the only opposition left. By the time they
Also,
were getting towards the
a
east.
bit of odd history. The founding father of the new Polish government, Józef Piłsudski, actually fought alongside the Central Powers. He was a Central Power officer.
Yeah, this is part of the thing where it's like it gets weird with the Soviet collapse, where it's like a lot of these people that were fighting each other like 5 minutes before are suddenly on the same side. Um,
Also, another fun reason. One of the big reasons that the Ukrainian Social Republic, People's Republic failed. The guy who ran it was a giga-brained idiot who basically declared war on everyone.
yes, he did. He declared war on the Russians for a bunch of land in Russia. He declared war on the Don Kuban Cossacks. He declared war on like
He
just
declared
just just
war on.
name a neighbor.
He
Just name
also
a
declared
neighbor of
war on
Ukraine, and he
Poland,
declared war on them.
Romania,
Yes,
Belarus. I believe he even declared
Germany.
war on Lithuania.
They also declared war on Germany.
Yes, they
Um,
did. There's a reason.
so yeah,
There's a
then
reason
then
they
we
got
get kind of
crushed.
into the Red October, which is the September October kind of coup that happened, and this sort of 10-day absolute crazy shit. And then of course all of the a lot of these republics start breaking away. Like there's the Transcaucasus Republic, there's the Ukrainians that are forming like four different governments. There's I think one in Belarus. There's all the Baltic nations are doing it. Poland is now breaking free.
Hmm.
Finland has essentially declared that they are joining the German side. There's all this stuff in Central Asia going nuts. It is absolutely insane. All because there is not a constitution, and the vote for a political party to then write the constitution was lost by the Bolsheviks. But to be fair, it was a very close election no matter what. So the Soviets thought that they got cheated
Oh no, they
because
didn't. They just come on, man. They just said fuck that. We're not going out like the previous government.
also that they also kind of went like, we're not just standing the fuck down. Are you
This
fucking
is
crazy?
Lenin. Like he doesn't.
Yeah,
This is Lenin. He likes to claim that he's willing to let the party discuss, but the man was a tyrant that ostracized most of his peers because he refused to back down. Come on. He would not
yeah.
have accepted a loss like that.
As I said, that's why they didn't do it. They A lot of the claims was, oh, the election was uh, rigged, fake news, all this sort of stuff. The main thing is that in the cities, yeah, no, the Soviets won the cities so handily. Like I can see why they would believe that they were the massive popular party and everyone else was lying.
Actually, from what I remember, it wasn't actually as close as what you're thinking. Like they
It
didn't
was
lose
like a
horribly.
40%.
They got
Yeah, they
forty
didn't lose
percent, but
horribly.
they got crushed by like the social revolutionaries that had like well over
Yeah,
50,
like the SR like the SRs together had like about 50% of the
a
vote,
little
which I
over,
think
yeah.
was which was why it was like I was said it was really close. And both of the SRs they'd alienated them. So yeah,
Also, what the fuck you missed not need complete dumpster fire because holy shit, Russian Civil War and the Russian revolutions, both of them, and the things that led to it, absolutely insane.
very complicated scenario.
Uh,
The
in terms of the supernatural
Yes,
world, the demons are a lot more coherent because you just have your general white affiliated Camellia group, which is essentially if they have to accept that the old order is changing, they're going to try to make sure it's one where you can still make big business. And then you got the Unchained Soviet who see this as Constantinople 2, destroy the god machine Boogaloo. And they want to
yeah,
kind of work with this new organization and group.
yes. So this also then, of course, as we're talking about when they're talking about that, like the Bolshevik, does were incredibly popular in the cities, but the countryside was where basically everybody else had a lot of popularity because the Bolsheviks, quite frankly, were an urban party. They were very focused on the urban worker and their sort of necessities and needs compared to the peasant stuff. Because the peasant stuff was basically what the SRs were founded from, comparatively speaking.
Which, if you're wondering why that's the thing, again, going back, blah, blah, blah.
It's
Uh,
complicated.
in
Let's
short,
keep
there's a
moving.
previous agrarian group called the Narodniks. This is where they usually came from. The Narodniks were an agrarian movement that actually played around with both anarchism and then when Marxism became it was invited in basically as they learned more about the works of Marx. That was also incorporated at least partially because taking the sweat of the toil of your brow, that works as well for farmers as it does for industrialists. Mao would come to this same conclusion about a decade later. Actually, around the same time. Basically, in short, that's where they come from. That's why they're agrarian.
Yeah. Then this gets into the next section of this, which is like, okay, so so you know how the Tsar has their secret police that disappeared people in the night and executed dissidents and also burned down houses, often using
Oh, yep,
paramilitary
the
groups,
Cheka slash Okrana.
the Okhrana, which then, as the government fell of the Tsarist movement, the Soviets, who had been on the receiving end of all this, realized, you know what? That's a great idea. Let's try that because these guys, there's obviously saboteurs and people plotting against the government,
Because we
and they're
lost
right
the
about
election
that.
by a lot.
And they're right about that, but they're wrong about the reason why.
You forget the
A
part
lot
where
of the
they
people,
recruit a lot of former Okrana members to keep
yeah.
starting.
So 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 the so basically, they forget that the Okrana guys are immediately like, "Oh, this is just great. This is perfect," because they just swap hats and they just keep
Well,
doing what
yeah,
they're
because
doing.
they thought, oh, I thought we were going to execute us all to a
Oh, we're
man.
gonna get yeah. And they're like, wait, no, we can point the finger at the people who would execute us, and thus the pairs begin. Because obviously, as any good revolutionary government knows, and this is no exception in anywhere, is that the enemies of the revolution must be dealt with in some way, shape, or form, whether through exile, execution, or just made irrelevant. The Checa's preferred method was execution.
So, yeah, as for what the Soviet Union did, funnily enough, there were two stages of dealing with Germany. The first was actually the best of a bad situation because the Germans weren't listening. Trotsky came up with the refuse to fight but refuse to run idea,
Basically, we're just going to hold what land we have, but we're not going to launch any more offensives. Like we're done
which the
attacking. We'll just hold what we
Germans
got.
exploited brutally.
They did. The next bit with that was also that they were pretending. They were basically trying to delay the negotiations as long as possible in the hopes that there would be another revolution in Germany. That did not pan out, so they signed
It got crushed.
Brest-Litovsk because yeah, it got both. It wasn't like they
Didn't
signed
happen at this point.
Brest-Litovsk.
It didn't happen at this point. There was an abortive mutiny, I believe, among the sailors in the German Navy
There was some talk. No, because Brest-Litovsk is
in
way
July.
before that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
In
Brest-Litovsk was
March.
in March.
Sorry.
So they literally were holding out for a revolution that was months away,
Yeah,
and they
they just
decided
didn't.
that they just couldn't do it any longer because the Russian Civil War was starting at that point.
Also,
The
they were
whites were
going to lose more
organizing.
land if they didn't roll over at this point.
Yes, yes, and it was still a lot.
Uh,
So the
It's really just a fortunate blessing that the Germans collapsed in the armistice.
yes, otherwise the entire Russian Revolution would have become an even more fucking crazy shit show.
Because some of the things
Uh,
they lost were all of the Baltics, Finland, including Karelia, all of Belarus, most of the
most of
Ukraine,
you,
I
yeah,
believe
most of
the
Ukraine.
Don Kuban region.
I think that they were supposed to make that independent. I could be wrong, but there's a lot of there's a lot of shit that they lost, and the sudden establishment of a Polish state, which didn't exist before, where the Germans shoved all of their Polish nationalists into it immediately as fast as possible.
That's where Josef
Um,
Pilsudski came from,
exactly,
because he was a
because
commanding
they knew that
officer
they'd
among the
fight the
Germans.
Russians, because the territory given to the Polish state was actually rather small, and a lot of the territory that was still historically Polish was in fact in Russian hands. So there was another way
Although
of keeping
they
the
spoke
Russians busy.
Ruthenian languages like Belarusian and Ukrainian rather than
Yeah,
Polish.
that didn't matter to the Polish nationalists at all. It really did not. This was Polish clay by goddamn it, and they were going to take it. And so they went to war with all their neighbors. Yes, this happened a lot in all of this. It wasn't just the Ukrainians that were doing it.
It's
It was
funny
the
too because after the Great Wars in the 20s, Poland then tried to create what they came up with called the Intermarium, and Pilsudski always
basically
was
everybody
confused.
told them like, what the fuck, man? Like you
You,
fucking attacked us like a half a decade ago. We're not gonna fucking do
I think
this.
my favorite was Lithuania's response. Remember Vilnius? They, they just they
Yeah,
just they just said remember Vilnius, and then they told them to fuck off. Like I believe they were the most blunt. I mean, and
yeah.
brusque. Holy shit! The Czechs also were very much loathing of the Poles during this time.
Yes, because there was a bunch of land in around Slovakia that the Polish attacked them over. It got a little nuts. So they talk a bit about like moving into the assembly. Like again, the technically speaking, the Constitutional Assembly did assemble with their correct delegates. It's just the Bolsheviks at this point had already boycotted it, as had several of the SRs. So there was no way to form a majority because they were not going to get a majority.
They didn't. Like,
And
that's the big reason. If the SRs that boycotted it showed up, the Bolsheviks would have been left in the lurch.
yes, but they didn't because they were pissy because of the horse trading that men like Kerensky had done in order to get the delegates around and all this.
Again, Kerensky's
So
entire storyline is short-term gain for long-term losses.
yes, so basically the Constitutional Assembly was fucked from the get-go because the one of the major forces that had caused the entire, you know, system to be created in the first place is completely isolated from the government and is already a paranoid sort of movement worried about counter-revolution, which has already started to happen. And now the paranoia just keeps going
Oh, you forget the
crazy.
best part is after they try to figure out what to do and wander around like headless chickens, the Bolsheviks just kind of show up with union
Yeah,
workers and just arrest
they
them
just show up and
collectively.
they take it over. Basically, yeah. Here's one of the things. Like you can criticize Lenin for a lot of things. You cannot criticize him for not acting, which is kind of what Russia needed at the time was someone to
I
do something,
well, no, the
anything.
Russian leaders did do stuff. They just were idiots. No, I'm not kidding. Like,
Just sitting around doing basically nothing though. That's the thing. They were just sitting around like negotiating out of both sides of their mouth with the Entente and the Central Powers when they could have just said, you know what, fuck it, we're done, we're out.
fuck it,
Instead they're trying to
we
drag it
capped,
out.
we're done.
Yeah, we're done. We're
And
just
then
like
and
whatever.
then if the UK makes noises, they go, okay, come on, try to Gallipoli us. That worked so
Yeah, come
well
on,
last time.
try and fucking go for it. Like we're not gonna. Yeah, there's a
You want
lot
our
of
debt
things they
back?
could have
Try
done.
landing in Arkhangelsk or in St. Petersburg. We'll make sure it goes
Yeah,
just as well as it did for you back down there in the Straits of Marmara.
yeah. It's
If that happened, yeah, Lenin would have been up shit's creek because he also was actually sluggish originally. It wasn't until after the first revolution he became much more
Yeah,
active.
once the first revolution happened, you realize, oh shit, it's getting ahead of me, and I won't have anything to do with it, and I don't want that to happen. So, yeah, a lot of it's basically this is kind of him playing catch up. Um,
Oh, this is not the post-Soviet Balkanization. This is Russian Revolution.
this is Russian Revolution, which is very similar to post-Soviet Balkanization, because as it turns out, basically the same sort of situation of the Russian Empire was in fact the Soviet Union. They just sort of exchanged a paint job. Uh, but yes, they kind of get out into the talk about like the terror because the white movement, of course, are talking like it's a unified thing. It really isn't.
No, you had
The
the OMS government, which originally was actually run by a shaky alliance of left SR and white SRs, right SRs. They were white, but they were socialist. They claimed to support a socially democratic movement, but never held elections, and it was only held in the hands of the few elite.
yeah,
This group would eventually be overthrown by an admiral named Alexander Kolchak, who basically put that idea to bed. Then
yeah.
you
There's a
had
little,
the Arkhangelsk army, which was mostly propped by the French and the British.
and also then a regiment of American soldiers who ended up stuck there from very cold parts of the country, were given Remington made Mosin Nagants and told it, go have fun, boys.
Yeah,
And that's the Polar Bear Expedition. It is an
a lot,
absolute shit
a
show.
lot of them hailed from the Dakotas, Minnesota, Upper Peninsula, Michigan,
Michigan
Wisconsin.
and Wisconsin. They just went, where is it cold in the US?
Oh, but
Oh, these guys. Okay, we'll send them there.
oh, by the way, quite a few of them came back very angry because a lot of them were Finnish immigrants who did not want to help the
Yes.
Tsar.
Yes. It's there's also a bit of that with that
There is
a lot of
also
these
the
people were like,
Estonian Legion, who only was allowed to exist because the Russian soldiers that were serving in that group were allowed to as long as they acknowledged that Estonia was independent. The moment they tried to
yeah,
renege on that, they were kicked out and given to the Bolsheviks.
yeah, there's a
Then
lot of
there
just
is
crazy
Denikin's
shit.
army, who spent more time actually trying to kill as many Jews as he could than he did wanting to actually fight against the Soviets.
Yes. Some of this is also that the part of the reason why the government has also moved to Moscow is the threat that the British are going to invade.
Which is
And
not unbelievable.
quite frankly, they probably were going to try at some point, but the British were a little bit busy at the time.
Partially
They
because the Great
still
War was still in effect, but by this point, especially since the Civil War is kicking off in March, they know at any point if this Great War ends that they will try to go through the Baltic. So yeah, they moved to Moscow. Moscow also had the advantage of it had a lot of development over the course of the Tsar's histories, last
Yes.
100 years.
Also, it was a major rail hub, and I want to note this. The Soviets, one of the things that the Soviets did that won them the entire conflict is that they realized that trains are really important.
They were the first to recognize this significantly.
In the Russian Civil War, they were the ones that realized trains are important, and we should probably keep control of the trains.
On top of
And they
that,
did everything they could to keep control of the trains, and they were mostly successful.
Another aspect that got them the victory, well, first off, they have the most industrialized region, which means that they have access to the Tula arms plant,
Tula Arsenal, yes.
which is the source of the most of their weaponry. That means that they're better equipped. Secondly, due to the reforms by by Lev Trotsky, he actually organized an officer corps, rehabilitating former white officers that showed promise that actually hated the
A
federal
lot of it
government.
was actually basically what Trotsky did, and this is actually kind of brilliant, is he basically said, like, look, do you want to serve the people that are calling on foreign powers to invade us, or do you want to fight for an actual Russia?
He says
And he
straight-facedly,
managed to get in
ignoring that
contact with,
Lenin was brought in by Germans.
yes, mind you, this is kind of the case of for everyone.
Oh yeah,
But
I
the
just
other
have
thing
to
with that
point
is
that
that
out.
Brusilov also went, you know what, the Bolsheviks have the right idea, fuck the monarchists.
Actually,
Uh,
one of their more brilliant field marshals who was killed in his prime, Tukhachevsky, was a white officer who took Trotsky's deal.
Yes, basically the deal was you whatever the hell, like we don't care what your politics really are, as long as you're willing to fight for us. Like
Shut up, follow the
just shut
party
up, follow the
line.
orders, and fight.
Yep.
That's all we ask for you, and afterwards we'll leave you alone.
Another thing he did was he actually, from scratch, reorganized and built an entire army structure and logistics train from scratch.
Yeah, Trotsky did a lot. Admittedly, he also says that he did a lot of things that he didn't do in his books, but he did do a lot.
In fact, it's actually commonly ascribed that his massive amount of actions during this period, combined with his former Menshevik status, being why most of the other old Bolsheviks legitimately despised him.
Yeah, because Trotsky's the weird autistic guy who loved trains.
Well, no, he's the
That's
weird
kind of
autistic
why.
guy who brags about his accomplishments, has a lot of them to his name, and in an area like the Soviet Union where you don't really know how things are going to be run, do you really want this weird motherfucker to run roughshod over you? Because he's kind of like Lenin in some respects. He thinks he's smarter than some people
Yeah,
in the room, and he has a bad habit of trying to talk over people.
yeah. Again, Trotsky's a genuinely interesting person. It's just he's also
But yeah, Trotsky did a lot to run the logistic effort. He also, one that also is very commonly slept on, mainly because he died during this time, was Sverdlov. He did a lot of the reorganization efforts as well. He helped Trotsky there. Also, the guy who legitimately founded the Russian training corps for officers, Mikhail Frunze. Mikhail Frunze was another one. Basically, the Soviets actually had some pretty good reformers on their sides.
yes, they did. Also, the fact that Trotsky was able to pull a rabbit out of a hat and reorganize the entire defense of Petrograd, which is
Trotsky
like
once bragged that he, within the span of 2 months, managed to scrabble together a 1 million-man army. He
he
wasn't,
kind of did.
and his numbers actually are commonly considered to only be very mildly exaggerated.
He might have only had 800,000. Like
But no, he
no,
was
he
able to
legitimately was
scratch
able to get
together
yeah.
a legit army with relatively full equipment compared to the whites.
Yes, which is what we get into in the next page, which is the three fun fronts of the three generals, because it's like, yeah, there are a lot of people in Russia, and there's a lot of fronts to go through. So, like by 1920, the Red Army is basically organized and actually fighting, and by 1922, it's basically over. The White Army, a lot of the reason why the White Army fails is that there's no unified leadership, there's no unified anything. They don't control any central parts of the country. They control a lot of the edges, and they don't control any of the industry, and they're almost entirely reliant on foreign supplies to do anything.
That is
And on top
partially
of that,
correct. They did have access, at least partially, to Baku's oil, at least in the south, but the problem is that only really benefited Denikin.
yes, on top of
Unanich,
that,
fucked. He was fucked. He basically only survived because Latvia and Estonia preferred him over the Bolsheviks.
yeah,
And that only lasted
and,
for a while.
and then it gets kind of wonkier. So they talk about, of course, the South and like all the Monkano stuff, where they're talking about like who actually controls the territory. We're fighting all this other stuff, and it gets kind of into a bit of a wild thing.
Oh,
The
by the way, if you want to know why the professional revolutionary concept was so popular among the Russians during this time, this is actually a weird sidetrack because we're talking about Makhno. Uh,
yeah,
his, I would say, partially spiritual successor, he was very big in Russian revolutionary circles. Sergei Nechayev, who Karl Marx actually made fun of regularly. Nechayev was very much of the opinion that there should be what's called a professional revolutionary, and that you should, under no circumstances, you have to basically give pretty much as you can, including your life, to it. Um, if you've ever heard the term barracks communism, it is making fun of Nechayev's weird anarchist concept, which was forced collectivization. Huh, I wonder where that came from.
yeah.
Oh, wait, this guy named Vladimir Ilyanovich Ulyanov actually commonly would cite him, at least partially, as an inspiration. Only partially, though. Huh.
Yeah. Mind you, the forced collectivization was never Lenin's real thing. That was more of the
But,
Stalin
like,
era.
his concept, several of his Leninist concepts did come. Nechayev wrote a lot of
Yeah,
ideas like
Nechayev
that.
did. Yeah. A lot of he read Nietzsche and was like, "Huh, this guy had some good ideas."
And then he
So
combined it
the
with Marx and his own ideas. Democratic centralism is something Lenin came up with himself. So what's democratic centralism? Really quick. He actually did believe in a form of democracy. The way it would work is in a one-party state, the party would actually be given issues to resolve. You would be able to debate, argue, and come up with solutions, and then a vote would be held. If the vote is pretty close, like contested, then it can be talked about later down the line. But if a clear majority vote in favor or against it, that's it. You can't say anything negative about it. You can disagree, but you have to basically cope with what happened.
you have to cope, seethe, and mold. Just let it's going to happen.
And that's what you can see that in his leadership. Basically, the moment he made a decision, shut the fuck up, he's going to do it.
Shut the fuck up. And sometimes he's even like things that where he was not for it, he still got behind it because the majority wanted it. It was weird. Lenin was very weird
He actually
as a
stuck
political leader.
through. He was surprisingly able to stick through with his beliefs somewhat, which you don't
Yeah.
usually see.
Yeah, that's why I'm like Lenin's a weird guy. It's hard to know where Russia would have gone with him, but we kind of all know how it went without him. So it's like shit.
The way I would describe it is the Soviet Union is kind of an interesting, like, I this is why I love talking about the early Soviet. So many things could have changed just from little things, like what if Frunz didn't die of his illness? What if Sverdlov didn't work himself to death? What if
Yeah,
Stalin died during the attack on the Vistula, which could have happened?
could have happened. There's a lot of shit, which is also they talk about kind of in when we're going through like the southern front and like the all that under the next pages where they talk about the eastern front, which is Siberia is kind of like weird
Uh,
because the Siberians kind of integrate the Czech Legion, but not really, and it gets a little wonky.
oh, also, if you're wondering why the Tsar was executed, it wasn't actually
It's
by
the
Lenin.
Czechs. It's the Czechs. Basically, the Czechs are getting close to them, and Lenin, while he doesn't
Well,
order it,
no, Lenin
is
doesn't
not
order it. Most
exactly
of the
opposed to it.
Yeah, Lenin didn't order any of this. Trotsky knew about it. Sverdlov, it's rumored Sverdlov might have been the one to okay it, but he also might have just said good job when the soldiers decided to do
Yeah,
it.
it's like, and honestly, it's like that they weren't killed almost immediately is kind of almost an anomaly.
They actually were kept.
Um,
It's very similar to the French Revolution, where they were actually, in this case, he was allowed to have one of his manors as essentially his own place to live.
yeah, a lot of it is
He
that
had his own manners. He was allowed to keep
yeah,
the servants of the manor. He actually was just, like, it was legitimately same living style. Just he couldn't leave the building, well, actually,
yeah.
he could leave the building, but not the yard.
So basically, the Czech Legion was actually approaching the area where they were, and one of the major fears that the local Soviet had was that if the Tsar is found, he becomes a rallying figure for the white movement. So we have
Which
to get rid of him,
which does make logical
which
sense
makes
because
sense. It's one of those things where it's like no shit. So
so
the
what
best way to
happens
get
is the local commander who was friends with Sverdlov orders, like, he wasn't like he was like a
gets
mid-level
together and
functionary. He
they have
orders
a
them to do it. Funnily enough, they do it in a dark basement. They're somewhat drunk because they actually grew to know the Tsar. They did not
yeah.
want to do this.
This is kind of yeah because Nicky for all his faults is not a terrible
They
person.
hate it. In the words, there is actually a Soviet soldier who actually wrote a little bit about this because he was one of the guys in the firing squad. In his
Yeah,
own words, he actually, like, he couldn't pull the trigger on him.
yeah, like the
He
others,
was
no
able to
problem.
fire on his wife, but he couldn't do it to him or the kids.
Nicky was like, yeah, his
And
wife was a bitch, but like, yeah,
and what happened was, no, like, afterwards, he basically just, as they all left and the area was filled with smoke, he just kind of sat there and legitimately gave a funerary service right while crying because he didn't want to do this.
yeah. There's a lot of that sort of stuff that was
Also,
talked about.
at one point, as they're kind of desperately trying to bury them, Anastasia's corpse actually falls out of the cart.
Yes, there's some of that too, where it's like They bury
They,
the bodies in slightly different places because they're like, ah, shit, we lost a body. So that's part of the reason why it took so long to find a couple of the corpses,
it's
is
also
that
where the
literally,
Anastasia myth comes from because her body was
yeah,
one of two that
was
fell
not in the
out.
grave. The other one was Lexi's, if I remember correctly. And it's entirely because their bodies fell out of the cart because they were all very drunk. And
Also, if you're wondering, yes, the demons actually recreated Anastasia as a cover.
Anastasia as a cover, which is brilliant. I love that little detail.
That's a fun little detail. I wanted to bring
Yes.
it up when they mentioned in the book. It's really funny.
By the way, they also have a fun bit where they talk about Kolchak. Um,
Kolchak's an interesting guy too. Funnily enough, despite being a dictator and also being rather like he wasn't as bad as Denikin. I'm not kidding. Denikin. Uh,
Anakin was really bad. Yeah.
if I remember right, Denikin. I don't think it was Tsaritsyn. It was one of the cities along the Volga River. He basically let his soldiers loot and pillage for
Pillage
3 days.
everything, and it's like the Jews are obviously the cause of this entire revolution. We need to kill all of them.
He legitimately did pogroms, like mass
Yeah,
pogroms. He actually had a kill on sight order, if I recall, at one point. He
yeah,
at one point, even before then, he basically said they don't have anything to rob because they stole it all from the Russian people. He legitimately said that after his soldiers robbed the Jewish quarter of everything.
yeah. There's a lot of other
He
things
was
like
a
with this
piece
where
of
it's
shit. Holy.
yeah.
Kolchak
Again,
though, he was also a pretty awful guy, but but he has an interesting career. He actually was one of the guys that worked on the first icebreakers in the Russian Navy. He
yes, and then
also
of
he
course,
also was an amateur marine biologist.
they had the next step, which is the Red Terror, which is basically the traditional thing that happens anytime there's a large revolutionary government in a civil war, is that anybody who's in opposition to the government has to go.
Which happened
This
in even the U.S. The Whiskey Rebellion could be
Yes,
argued
there's the
as
Whiskey
a government terror.
Rebellion. There's also, of course, what happened to various loyalist groups inside of
Oh
the
yeah.
United States. There's the French Revolution is very infamous for it because they systematically organized it.
Actually,
Uh,
that one's kind of a fun, odd tragedy because the funniest thing is Robespierre is forever seen as this villain. But if you actually look at his history as in office and in
well,
power
before he
before
went
that,
absolutely fucking crazy,
no, like he
he,
was a genuine he was a lawyer. He actually genuinely fought for rights. He actually made a repeated efforts to try
okay,
to improve the situation in Haiti.
you're going after me for being a little bit like waffly on Lenin being
Oh no, you
completely a
can shit
fucking
on me because
monster.
the motherfucker did order
But
like 20
you're
million.
saying Robespierre was not a fucking
Oh no, he
was a
became a
good
monster
guy.
by the end of it. But like, keep
Like,
in
are you
mind,
fucking
do you want to know what he
serious?
did? No, do you want to know what he wanted to do to Haiti? He wanted to actually
Give it
enfranchise the
independence.
slaves.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Like,
Like before he went into power and went completely insane.
yeah.
He
Like,
doesn't sound like
here's
a
the
bad
thing.
guy.
Okay. Like you can argue with Lenin's motivations about certain things.
Same.
Robespierre, though,
No, he was
not
insane.
really.
He wandered around in a toga and claimed there's no god, there's only humans. After
Yes, he
killing like
claimed he was
20 to 50,000
he
people.
took a fucking he had a fucking festival thrown in the center of Paris where he declared himself the avatar of the god of reason.
Yes, he did.
Okay,
Yes, he
so
did.
like you cannot tell me that this man is not crazier than basically everyone but like three people in the revolutionary Russia.
Oh, I'm aware. I'm aware. I'm also pointing out that until that happens, you wouldn't have expected it.
I mean, no, he was still acting a little bit crazy before that.
A little
Um,
compared to Marat, the guy in the goddamn bathtub who ordered them to kill all nobles, like screaming from the fucking windows.
okay.
Compared to him,
But yes,
the guy that the average Parisian tended to read the most because his newspaper was among the most popular. No, I do not condone Robespierre. I just like to sometimes play devil's advocate because if you actually look at, it's similar to how you can actually play something similarly disgusting with Papa Doc Duvalier because he also did a lot of efforts to get rid of tropical diseases, but then he made the Tonton Macote, that shit.
yeah. So they go into, of course, the NKVD and the Ukraine and all that. And then, of course, they go into war, communism, and the new economic policy, which is actually one of the most like things that when you read about it, you're like, what the fuck?
So
Because it doesn't seem to make any sense
it
with like
does
how the
though.
Soviet Union is supposed to.
It
But if you actually know what proper Marxist theory is, not the Marxist Leninist theory, that's very different. The which is not Marxism or Leninism because yeah, it's wild. Okay,
yeah.
just follow with me here. So the basics of Russian style communism is this: the basic of the Marxist tenet is that there will be you need to have the bourgeoisie and a middle class and a functioning market economy to then eventually transition into socialism as the workers achieve enough consciousness and experience to be able to run everything perfectly.
Yep, they have to be trained, they have to be educated to be able to realize the tools of their liberation.
Yes.
It's a very
So
simple concept. This is actually what he predicted would be the path of revolution in
yeah.
Germany, in the United Kingdom, in France, uh, Italy to a very lesser degree, but basically
Well,
anywhere that's reasonably educated and developed. The U.S. is an example that he also listed later on.
yes. One of the things with that is that what Marx forgets about, and he was correct at what the end result of what he was seeing would be, which would be large scale revolutions if there was not a change to the status quo. But the labor movements of the late 19th century and early 20th century brought the sort of rights that kept the situation from exploding into complete violence.
What happened was
Uh,
John Henry Mills was correct. John Stuart Mills was correct. Stuart Mills, I forget. There's a bunch of theorists for these. Basically, the Social Democrats were right.
yes. Marx was not wrong in seeing where the trajectory was going to end up. He was wrong in assuming it was an inevitability.
He saw it as an
Basically,
inevitability. He also discounted Democrats in general, mainly because it's not that he didn't think they went far enough. He thought he thought that there was a potential that they would align too closely with the bourgeoisie because it does have an appeal among them.
also part of it, I think, was that he thought that they'd get purged because that's what was happening a lot in when Marx was writing some of his earlier theories.
He saw it
Is the
happen during the
crackdowns of
springtime of
nine?
Europe.
Yeah, he saw that shit happening, and so he thought that what's going to happen is that it's not is that any sort of attempt at reform is going to end up getting
Well,
strangled in the
actually,
cradle
Marx is
by
not against reform at all, mainly because his views are actually expounded upon by Engel, who openly admits we would love to actually just do this via reform. We would love to actually get into power via election, via the desire to change. It's just that
we just
we
don't
don't.
think that that's going to happen.
No,
Yeah,
we would love to, but we don't know if the reactionaries would ever allow it to happen without the threat of violence.
yeah. Which kind of correct, I guess, because remember the labor movement back in the late 1880s was very willing to shoot people.
Mainly because in
Um,
response they'd be shot back at Battle of Blair Mountain, where the first bombs dropped on
yeah,
U.S. soil happened. Yes, they hired a couple of biplanes to drop bombs out of to, bomb
yeah,
the coal miners.
yeah. There's a lot of that sort of shit. So, but right. So
But
this
here's the thing:
means back to this.
No. Let me. Marx also did predict, though, that it is entirely possible that a socialist movement can occur outside of this traditional norms. In Russia, for example, because he brought this up, in Russia, for example, a movement that is based on the agrarian and peasantry, the former serfs and the farmer, might be the avenue of their freedom.
Right. So here's where we're getting to back to the Lenin thing. So Lenin's idea is that we're not actually ready for communism yet.
Which
We
isn't
need,
incorrect.
which isn't incorrect. Russia's not an industrialized power. Russia
Most of
isn't all
them,
that, but they,
they're also not very literate. Again, only one. I think by
yeah.
this point,
So
maybe 1 out of 3 could read. You need that better.
yes. So his entire idea is that what we're going to do is we're going to speed run capitalism. He is going for the fucking speedrun strats on capitalism. He thinks we can probably get it done in 50 to 60 years if we put a lot of effort into creating a middle class that will then jumpstart these peasants into being good proletariat workers, which will then cause communism to naturally get there without the need for another revolution.
It also helped that he actually really liked the idea. He had a guy that he disagreed with a lot, but his name was Nikolai Bukharin,
Yes.
who actually espoused a form of market socialism, where basically market socialism is, yeah, you have the collective ownership of the company, but you still use a market system. Basically, he's going, well, you see, if you could collectivize a farm, or you get a bunch of people to form a
Why can't you
cooperative,
collectivize a factory? Like why can't you
why can't you
collectivize
let
all
the
these things?
workers collectively run it and then operate it on market principles?
Yeah, so that way that you get competition, but the
And
people
and
still own it.
and we also can
Yeah,
provide them the tools, because they would not be able to necessarily afford. We can provide them from the government coffers things like tractors or machine tools so they can set up these plants
yeah, and
using
this is one of the
initiative.
other. This is also one of the initiatives behind the collectivization to some degree in Russia proper. The voluntary one, at least, was the same idea. Which again, the voluntary collectivization in Russia actually did increase crop yields inside of Russia.
And that was another thing.
It's
Both
just that
Bukharin and Lenin agreed that it also would be fine for small businesses to operate like this. It's very similar to
yes,
Deng's at opening of China, actually.
yes, and as it turns out, this is actually responsible for a lot of the growth that happened during the recovery from the Civil War. Is
Legitimately,
that
if it wasn't for the NEP, the recovery wouldn't have happened as it did. And also, it's because of the NEP that the first indigenous, well, not the first indigenous, but the first indigenous engine designs for Soviet aircraft were made.
yeah,
Because you had forward-thinking, ambitious people that were willing to essentially repurpose old French and German engines and turn them into something new.
and also there was a lot of the Soviet government was also very willing to take people's crazy ideas and throw money at them because if it worked, that was proof that the Soviet system worked.
Did you know that the
So
Soviets almost did not, almost refused to join the Olympics? They actually, there was talks about them forming their own thing called the Spartakiad, which was a
yes,
socialist version of the Olympics.
there was also, if I remember correctly, a whole Soviet like division just devoted to we are going to fund the weird art people.
Yes,
You
there
know the
were.
fucking idiots on Twitter that go like, "What would your job in the commune be?" And like they go like, "I would be a hip hop painter" and all this sort of shit. Well, the Soviet government in the early revolution legitimately patronized some of these people just to see what would happen.
This is where
Um,
some of the more interesting architectural ideas came from. It's also
yeah,
where the birth of modern Russian cinema came about, because
yes,
it's
they
responsible
saw
for some beautiful, like I actually have seen a couple of them. They're pretty cool.
they're
The
really good. They're
like
really
the
well
Alexander
done.
Nevsky movie is really good.
Yeah, like yes, are they
Uh,
propaganda? Yes.
the
Are they also
yeah,
genuinely well shot and using innovative filmmaking techniques that were not adopted in the rest of the world until like a decade later? Also, yes.
I'm not kidding. Nevsky and the October Revolution one, which is pure propaganda, not unlike something you would have seen in the Berlin Olympics or in the in the mid to late 30s Hollywood.
And this is done in 1920s Russia on the budget of 3 rubles and what vodka you can bring around. Like,
And a very badly and a very primitive camera that has a lot of
yeah,
lines and shit running through it.
yeah, it's genuinely impressive, like some of this early Soviet art and like cinema and all this sort of stuff. And it's all because of the fact that the government is trying to prove that they are the new way forward and they are the new man and all this other stuff. And it's genuinely interesting where this could have gone if not for one man and his very thick mustache
Yeah, because here's the
who
thing: a lot of people were allowed to experiment, dabble. Again, you couldn't really criticize the government because you would be a wrecker, you would be a saboteur.
yes, obviously you couldn't directly criticize the government, but
But
indirect criticism was
yeah,
totally fine. They consider that a natural part of the process of improvement. So therefore, you could do weird artsy stuff that was not completely in socialist principles because it may, in fact, be in the future a socialist principle. So you
two
could
other
try this
things that
shit.
did happen. One, after a very difficult fight, a limited attempt to allow women in the workforce was finally brought about, which that's a big deal. Like a
Yes,
lot of labor movements historically actually were sexist against women because they saw women entering the
yes.
workforce as a cudgel that could be used to lower the wages of men.
And it's very interesting that again, a lot of like very feminist things happen in early
Because
Soviet Russia that,
one of
that
the founding
immediately
members
get
of the
rolled back by
Bolshevik
Stalin.
Party, yeah, one of the founding members of the Bolshevik Party was Alexander. What was it? What was her name? Col
I don't.
Alexander Kolonai or something like Kolotai. She
Yeah.
was an early Russian feminist that basically also was responsible for the legitimately doubling Russian literacy, I think, from like 25 or 30% to like 60%.
Yes, because she used the army as a way to teach people, and it was very weird. Uh,
Other things that happen is there was an attempt to actually get rid of Cyrillic. They actually tried to make a Roman
yes,
script.
they did. There's a lot of other things, but they talk
They
about
Oh no, there's one more thing I really want to bring up because this is something that I really think is important. Colonizatia, colonization. Basically, since it's a new state, a new man, a new Soviet man, you don't have to care about being things like Russian. You don't have to care about things being like Mordvin, Tatar, or Siberian, Yakuts, Aleut. You're a Soviet. And they attempted to actually not only de-Russify parts of the country that basically experienced a lot of oppression because of their culture,
basically create entirely new ethnicities. Almost, it's really
not
weird.
only that, but also
Uh,
tried to make a more equal union because one of the early concerns among the old Bolsheviks and Lenin, and especially
Lenin was like, Russia should be the one that's leading the way, but we need to bring everyone else with us.
because we
So
don't want to be
therefore,
like
we
the
should,
Tsar. We don't want to be like the Tsar and just
yes.
turn everyone into little Russians.
Like, why would we turn everyone into Russia? That's pointless. They're all Russia should lead, but Russia should also bring them with us,
Which
which
leads
is
to
a
the
very
darkest
weird
irony
way. Yeah,
of a Georgian, a
of a
guy.
Georgian getting in power that then goes completely full. No, everyone should be Russian.
Yeah,
Uh, yeah. Again, there's a lot of shit that Lenin writes and talks about and actually did that it's like it's hard to get a handle on what he actually believed
I
sometimes
mean, I ding on Lenin,
because
but like I do, you gotta respect the motherfucker. Like, yeah.
yeah, like if you read some of his stuff talking about like the national movements and all this, where it's very obviously inspired by like the United States and by like a lot of early like thinking on like the terms of nationalism and self-determination and all these other sort of things, where it's also sort of at the same time he's also saying, yeah, no, we need to invade these countries so they do socialism correctly. Uh,
Yeah.
because they're, yeah, again, weird guy,
He
weird
is
guy,
he is
Lenin.
single-handedly responsible for the creation of the Third and Second International all at the same time, because the Second International was actually formed by what was known as the London Bureau, which were socialists, and there are actually communist movements that existed. Uh, the pre-KPD, like early Weimar Germany's Communist Party, for example, before Liebknecht and Luxemburg were killed, actually hated Lenin. They had their
Yeah, they
own
did.
variant of communism, which is called
They
council
thought he was a
communism.
fucking poser, basically.
On Lenin's death, one of the founding members of the Italian Communist Party, what was his name? Amadeo Borgia, I think was his name.
Yeah.
Borgia. He actually claimed he was more Lenin than Lenin, and one of his ideas was that he thought Lenin was wrong because he still had the concept of a ruble.
Yeah, he still had money, this fucking rube. Like again, I love early communist movements because they're so wacky. There's some genuinely interesting and clever things where it's like we could probably take from this and use something good out of it. And then there's just like oh yeah, they also gave a bunch of money to this guy because it sounded good, which is how we got the whole Lysenkoism, because he sounded good to certain party officials who had no idea about science, but now they're in charge of things, and the guys before them had no idea about science either. So I guess this guy is correct.
Oh hey, this guy is best friends with my close sycophant and ally Lazar Kaganovich. Let's order him to build the new airplane for the Soviet Union and the
Oh
superior
no, it
superior
exploded.
evil.
Like there's a lot of that, but that's the thing you get with any sort of young revolutionary government. There's a lot of that shit that happened. It happened in the US too. Like half the founding fathers are basically nepo babies that kind of only got in because it's like, oh yeah, he's a rich landowner that is kind of interested in making money.
one of
I
the
guess he's in the government now.
one of the best examples of the US of a US version of that is actually the class of battleships that were made, the same line of battleships that the USS Maine was based on.
Yeah,
The one that got
major design
exploded.
flaws. Yeah, major design flaw in the coal bunker.
And who
Which
built it? Oh yeah, a guy who was big friends with a major member of the pro Navy faction in the United States Congress.
Yeah, mind you, those designs for these early battleships, that was not the only one that exploded like that.
Also,
Um,
let's be fair, the U.S. had to do a crash build. Oh god, just so we don't get off topic too bad. In short, really quickly, the U.S. Navy actually gained a resurgence
was
after the
very
Civil War.
small.
Well, it gained a
It was
resurgence
very
after the
small,
war.
and then it resurged a bit, and then they wanted monitors and only monitors, and they had to be built exactly like the USS Monitor. And then we got to around 1880 or so, and there's this guy called Theodore Roosevelt who's looking at the Navy and going, "This is some real fucking ancient bullshit, and
Oh
we
no,
need to
it's
upgrade because oh god, look at what the fucking British are doing."
no, actually,
And
no, it's even more sad. So the U.S. Navy was never really that big originally because its whole purpose was to protect shipping. The Civil War happened, which had the monitors explode in popularity because we needed them for riverine warfare. We kind of figured we're not really going to go outside of our hemisphere, so we never really focused too much on it. And then the Chilean Navy rolled up to the Californian coast. The Chilean Navy, which had far larger and more advanced ships than our shitty little ironclads, then basically did a style and profile fucking dance, saying, yeah, we could blow up every ship on the West Coast and basically fuck you over.
yeah, respect our fishing rights, you fuckers. Basically, was the
And that
reason for
had
that.
Theodore Roosevelt go, we just got made a laughing stock by fucking
By
Chile.
Chile, a country that is about to scrap most of those ships because of a peace treaty. So we did engage in this massive crash build of a navy to modernize it because remember, Congress was like, we don't want to approve anything or spend
Oh,
any
they were
money ever
stubborn.
on
They were
anything.
so stubborn.
So they have to be monitors again. And it's like, okay, but this is a new monitor. So they use the same name for some of these ships like multiple times to make new ones so that Congress would just approve of it again and again. It got weird. They also did some horse favor trading for renaming ships to get votes. The original USS South Dakota, for example, was I want to say a 1909 constructed armored cruiser that then got renamed to the USS Huron uh, within like 3 years because of political reasons, partially, and also because they were trying to standardize the name of ships again.
Yep.
Because uh, God forbid we have states named after cities named after ships that are like this.
Oh, by the
And God
way,
forbid that
oops,
we
sorry.
don't name the biggest ships after states because that's what senators vote on, and senators make our budget.
That was legitimately a massive problem. But oh yeah, so hey, Piak, sexist seems a strong word for basically the math equation of more laborers equal value of labor go down. Um, that is partially correct. This is also why the early Communist Party of South Africa actually was pro-apartheid and only supported whites
Yeah,
originally.
they
That
then they
changed
then sort of
rapidly in the mid
backpedaled,
20s.
pedaled. Yeah, because in the mid 20s they sort of first off there was the Soviet kind of like National Brotherhood of Workers stuff that was coming out, but also that they were realizing that they were getting played by the factory owners pretty heavily with that. Because the factory owners were like, okay, you're not unionizing with the blacks, well then we'll just only hire blacks.
Well, no, that's why the Rand strikes happened. Uh,
Yeah,
and in the aftermath, actually, what happened was it was this massive failure to galvanize and force a reform that had one of the major members, like one of the heads of the party, go, wait a minute, 90% of this population's black,
and then
and
he kind of realized, oh shit, we really should be going
a
to.
true communist revolution would succeed a lot more easily if oh. And that's why socialist movements became rather popular among African communities in South Africa.
Yes, and in Africa generally, because as it turns out, when you create a permanent underclass, that underclass tends to love things like socialist movements because it promises them some sort of liberation
Yep.
and improvement in condition.
But and
That's
anyway,
one
the
of the
NEP
reasons. Yeah, NEP. We kind of went through that. It's kind of actually causes a lot of food. You know,
it causes improvements in farming output. It causes massive improvements in steel output because that's one of the many things that the
yeah,
Soviets were much concerned with is
they're
steel.
incorrect when they're saying it's a strategic retreat that will lead to victory. It's no, no, no. This was part of their plan, basically, because it's like it makes sense ideologically.
So what happens though
Uh,
is Lenin he was
Lenin has a
stressed.
stroke.
Well, no, he was always very
He,
stressed, and he also survived an assassination where he got shot twice.
yeah. Also, he was known as like a crazy man who would work like 20-hour days on the regular.
So his health
Um,
wasn't always that great anyway. Then he stroked out.
then he had a stroke, and he had a stroke at possibly the worst time. And there's some people that say that this was a plan by Stalin that slipped him pills or something like that. I
Well,
don't know.
it's plausible because Stalin is a rather paranoid. I don't think he would have thought of that at this point.
Yeah, the Stalin as we know him is only getting started at this point. He's
So
still learning the political ropes a lot more. But
also,
at the same time,
also,
Lenin sees immediately that he is the biggest threat to the Soviet Union as he knows it.
well, it's funny because Lenin, after this stroke, he realizes, yeah, my health is in the decline. Who can I have be my successor? Because he begins thinking
It's the
about
first
this,
time he's thinking about continuity in government because he kind of
and
assumed it would just all work out, and then he realizes, oh fuck, I should have been cleaning house.
well, no, he looks at everyone and then he goes, I fucking hate every single one of these losers. Zinoviev,
Again, I
you're a
should have.
fat coward who never, you're a big fat fucking coward who never actually agreed with going to war until I had to tell you to, motherfucker, after October. Kamenev, same problem. Goddamn shit sucking coward. Trotsky, no one fucking likes you. Stalin,
No one likes
you're
you,
a
Trotsky.
fucking monster.
Also a coward. Also
A
way too influential was the other
paranoid,
thing that he looked at.
cowardly monster. Uh,
Yeah,
Mikoyan, a weather vane. Brainless. Molotov,
he
Molotov, an airhead. He insulted
there
every single one of them.
he did. He basically went on a fucking roasting spree.
Every old Bolshevik. He actually wrote an entire series of documents. And throughout it, he actually was like regretting. God damn it, Sverdlov! Why did you die,
I should have
Frunz?
shot
Why
like
did you
five
die of
people.
cirrhosis? Why did you die, random guy? Why are all of you so shit?
Yeah, and basically, he's then like, okay, fuck it, we're going full democracy. Like that's the only way to salvage the situation, and then that kind of convieniently gets shoved under the rug
Well, no, what
by
happens is by
everyone
this
else.
point, yeah, he's in
Yeah,
bad shape.
because by this point, Lenin is bedridden and can't go out there and yell at people like he used to do, which is how he got them in line. And the Stalin is also intercepting his mail and maybe rewriting some of his letters.
And if
We
you're
don't
wondering
know.
how that happened, so okay, when everything was getting set up for the Soviet government during the Civil War, each of the old Bolsheviks were given things to work on. For example, Zinoviev, despite being, in Lenin's own words, a shit-sucking coward not fit to lead a chicken coop, let alone a nation, he was rather good at organizing railway unions. So he was allowed to organize, I believe it was called Petrograd at this point, the Petrograd
Yeah.
railway lines as well as Moscow. Lenin was given one of the prestigious, like there was only five at this point, five marshals of the Soviet army. And he was also, I believe, given the equivalent post of Minister of War. Stalin?
Trotsky was. That was
Yes.
Trotsky. Stalin was the one that then was given party
Stalin was
secretary
given, well, what happened was Lenin basically said, I want you to be party secretary. Because it's not the
because he
most
thought that this
glamorous
would keep him
post.
out of power.
Yeah, it's not the
It's
most
also that he
glamorous
thought it would
post.
keep him out of power. Stalin fucking used that to basically manipulate, gaslight, and arrange power factions because he, by nature of being the party secretary, had to be at every meeting, which means he had to meet everyone.
So what Stalin, yeah, this is what happened. Stalin, originally he was actually not happy with it because he considered himself at least on par with some of the others. They because the old Bolsheviks, this is actually one of the reasons why he was so prone to purging them. They were mostly of academic stock. Stalin was a flunk out failed monk.
Also,
His
Stalin,
dad beat him. He failed seminary school. He was a train robbing bandit, and unlike most of the Bolsheviks, he was actually far closer to working class, so to speak. His
it's
rough
also
and
that
tumble
Stalin.
Georgian accent, the fact he had scars on his face from the smallpox, yeah, they made fun of him a lot. They saw him as
It's
uneducated.
also yeah, I was trying to say it's also that Stalin did not win any battles at all
That too.
militarily. He
He
was
was a
not
terrible general.
successful. And this led to a lot of him being very, very jealous and paranoid about the military, which, to be fair, almost every revolutionary government is worried about the military in one form or another.
Hmm.
Um,
Also,
because the
Stalin can look
military,
to South America. Like you could just look to South America as a whole.
yeah. So basically put, Stalin starts to organize various assassinations and various things. He is the one that really starts the entire, oh, we're going to be invading, forced collectivization in excuse of this. He sees Bukharin's NEP as this threat to his power, because if someone else has a good idea and it is working and it is not his idea, then it is a problem and must be dealt with.
As to why he was able to get in power, again, he realized really quickly, party secretary, the Soviet Union's a one-party state.
Yes.
You're
So
essentially the head of the party. You can just put your
by
friends in
virtue
charge.
of by virtue of you get to write all the meeting notes and
Not only
you
meeting
thus
notes,
meet
but send out
everyone.
orders.
Exactly. So he used that as a tool to put his cronies into power and portray himself as a more moderate option to the others.
Yeah, because he
Um,
would paint. He usually painted Trotsky as the wide-eyed revolutionary who wants to burn the world, and he saw Bukharin as a and he called pointed pinned Bukharin as the crypto
uh,
capitalist.
yeah, crypto capitalist counter revolutionary in disguise, and
And
basically
he
he then
advocated what he called the center. Also, funnily enough, even though there's a term called Stalinism, he actually hated the term.
yeah, he never really used it himself. Stalinism is more of like the method
He
in which he
always
actually
called
controlled
himself
things,
he always called himself the steward of Lenin's legacy. He always
which is
compared
really fucking funny considering what Lenin thought of the man.
he
But
also he also called it Marxism Leninism because he
Marxist
elevated
Leninism,
Lenin.
which is definitely not what either of those people were wanting. It flies in the face of basically everything that both of them were talking about in
Because
terms of
Stalin
how
again
to
he
actually do this.
yeah, because again Stalin he wasn't much for book learning. His understanding of communism is actually where a lot of anti-communists get their tracts from. Like the
Yeah,
ones that don't read
basically,
Marx, this is usually what they interpret because Stalin
because
basically went,
obviously Stalin was truly a communist because he says so, and obviously everything that Stalin did is thus
I mean,
completely in line with Marxist thought because he called it Marxist Leninism. So that's obviously what Marx and Lenin believed,
also
which it
most
isn't.
forms of communism that experience that actually ran countries were of this type
Yes, because they were the ones that got put into
or
power
were
either
inspired
through
by this type. See Mao.
yes, see Mao. Though there are some exceptions, like the weirdos over in Nepal right now.
No, they started as a Maoist organization.
They
They just
started as a
stopped
Maoist
revolution.
organization, and then they evolved into something completely different,
Well, they
which
evolved closer
is
to actually Marx. Also, funnily enough,
yes,
the Japanese Communist Party is actually far closer to a social democratic party.
yep. It's just that
But
there's a
Stalin didn't
vibrant
understand.
anti-communist
He
movement in
wasn't much of a
Japan,
book learner. He knew how to organize charts, but he wasn't much of a book learner. So in
and
his mind, he thought, okay, so there is supposed to be a utopia at the end, and there has to be.
can we just skip all of this? Basically,
Oh,
is his whole thing is what if we just skip it?
what if we just have a
What if we
dictatorship
don't?
to build up the industry so that we can get everyone to be happy?
So that we can take over everyone and therefore create a state that will create communism because we will be invaded because that's what's happened before.
Yeah.
And because he's so paranoid about that shit and all this. And again, yes, was the Soviet Union attacking other countries under Lenin? Yeah. They were trying to reclaim the old Russian Empire that had broken away.
Again,
And also
Stalin's
they were,
many failures were against Poland.
yeah. Mind you, Poland was also definitely attacking the Soviets.
Oh God,
They were
yeah, they
going
were.
to do that.
Yeah, if you're wondering, Poland actually claimed almost all of Belarus and
Yeah.
half of the Ukraine, as well as Lithuania. They wanted to
Yeah.
reform the Commonwealth.
So as I said, there was going to be a war with all the neighboring states next to the Soviets in the former Russian Empire,
I mean,
simply because of
hypothetically, the
how the borders
Baltics,
were
you could
drawn.
probably. I mean, hypothetically, with the Baltics, you could probably have gone a peaceful route with them.
Yeah, but remember, this is a paranoia. They actually kind of did.
They had to
They
let it go because Britain basically
yeah
said, you what? Like
yeah
we will
no
bomb Petrograd.
yeah we will bomb Petrograd and what navy? You sunk half your navy, and we're going
You
to sink
sunk
the
half
other
your
half if you
navy
try
and
shit.
say hello to Rodney, Revenge, and Resilient or
Well,
whatever.
I don't think Rodney was around yet. It was but yeah. The point being, though, that um in the paranoia that the Soviets had in the early days about the capitalists coming
We're
to crush them
pretty justified.
was completely justified
I would say pretty
because
justified,
that's
yeah.
kind of what happened. Uh,
And Stalin, he was a paranoiac. He took over through subterfuge, basically
Subterfuge,
isolated people from the
assassination,
party, and then killed them.
yes, and then yeah, that's how we got all this shit.
And that is why
Uh,
the Soviet Union would have probably died in the 60s, but for a funny German man with a mustache. I mean, Austrian man. He wasn't German. With a
yeah.
mustache and one testicle.
What? Yeah, the entire reason why the Soviets lasted as long as they did is because of World War II, because they suddenly got a massive industrial shot in the arm from all the other allies. They got a national unifying myth
And an
finally.
external threat that further reinforces Russian paranoia of invasion upon its homeland.
Yep.
Which is why they were,
Uh,
which is, if you're wondering, that's why modern day Russia is so paranoid about Ukraine and all of the nations next to it.
it's like we have to invade them because
They're
they're
gonna
independent, which
invade
means that they're going
us.
to invade us because they're independent, which is a fucking self fulfilling prophecy of just like constant just insanity. But there you go. That's Russian geopolitical thinking because it's kind of how they are. But yes, the
Also this also lionized Stalin because he was
oh
seen
yeah,
as the
Stalin.
crusher of fascism.
Yeah, that's the other thing too because
Without that, he would have.
as
Without that, I'm gonna be honest. Khrushchev would have fucking been completely successful in dismantling his cult.
yeah, not only that, but probably Stalin would have been assassinated by an officer group at some point
Oh yeah,
without it.
after so many times that he locked away and or killed. Fun fact: Rokossovsky was actually scheduled for execution on the day of
He just started
Barbarossa
yelling at the yeah, he started yelling the fucking guys and
through
wait,
his
no, that was a
broken
different
teeth. By the way, no, through his broken
yeah, he
teeth.
started
It was him
yeah.
because they were torturing him before execution.
Yeah. The but yeah, the cultist personality kind of happened, and it's also the 5 year plan stuff where it's like somebody
Which,
realized
let's be
that
fair, Lenin did come up with this concept of
yeah,
quotas. Like
but
this
the
is
5 year
from Lenin
yeah,
partially.
yeah, yeah, but you have to also understand that this is like a roadmap. It wasn't like a strict quota. It was a this is a roadmap of what our goals should be. We need to try to meet it. It's not the this must be met or you will be shot.
Yeah, Stalin basically said, "You must reach this quota, or I shoot you because you are a wrecker."
Yeah. So then people immediately started to realize we don't actually have to do the work. We just wrote that we did the work.
Or pretend we did by showing them fake bullshit. Like, oh yeah, look at all
Yeah.
of this steel, and then they would just cart out the same steel and put more in there,
Yes,
or the same
because
planes.
again, it's that or get shot.
Oh,
So,
by the way, Stalin
uh,
also single-handedly crashed the a lot of his military industry, survivors, because let's see, tank designers gulagged, new
gulag,
rifle designers
gulagged.
gulagged,
All of you, do
aircraft
gulag.
designers
Why?
gulagged
The
and or shot.
and want to know the reason why, which is so fucking bizarre, by the way. The reason why, almost entirely, is he was paranoid about them somehow getting out of the country or their work being spied upon. So that's why he had so many of them either shot or sent to the gulags, where they would be kept completely under watch so that their ideas could not be stolen at all.
The funniest part about this, though, is several of them were gulagged specifically because he sent them himself to aid the Germans in their rearmament technical mission. This happened to most of
Yep.
the tank designers. He sent them to
Yep.
work with the Germans, along with, by the way, Tukhachevsky, and then used the same excuse to get rid of them.
Yeah, it's this again. It's this just paranoid schizophrenia, basically, of like,
There's a reason why there's actually a saying in this. I think there's a saying in Russia where Stalin's grip on sanity and reality was held together by his wife, and the moment she went away, Stalin left reality for his own version of his world.
yeah. Um, which this thing is like they want to say the 40s was the Soviet Union was an industrial powerhouse. No, it was not.
No,
Um,
they cranked out like half-finished tanks in a fucking farm factory in the middle of
they
nowhere.
still they it's impressive that they went from where they were to where they were
Again,
to
the thing with
but
Russian designers are they're able to come up with some cool shit. Like the aircraft. There's a which aircraft was it?
there are a
There's
lot
the
of aircraft designs that were really advanced. It's just that building them was something they couldn't do because they didn't have the industry.
well, no,
Uh,
they even did somewhat. Like what was it? I think it was the was it the no, it wasn't the Yak. It was I think there was one they made that was basically a mosquito before the mosquito was made. All
yeah, they
wood
did again.
plane.
They did a lot of very innovative design stuff. It's just that a lot of it is also like
But my favorite design is
completely fucked.
the one where they put an actual 76 millimeter artillery piece on the plane.
Yeah, they managed to do it, and it worked. It
I
worked.
mean, it flew
It's just
like
that it
dog
was,
shit and had a habit of nose diving, but yeah.
but it worked.
Also,
They also
funnily
created a
enough, the first MiG planes were made around this time. The
yeah.
engine they
They
used would later be used in the Sturmovik.
yeah, but yeah. So basically, the Stalin lionization that he had is kind of crazy. It's also that basically he shot any kind of like natural development in the cradle because it's like right after the Civil War. So like the industry,
All your friends shot. All your wizard friends shot. All your family shot. Anyone who sold you pierogi shot.
basically yes. So like a lot of the people that were involved in the NAP that are doing these more capitalistic things, which is kickstarting the Russian economy, all get shot. And then they
Also, a
lure
lot
in
of
dumb
the
Soviets.
officers.
They lure they lure in a bunch of dumb socialists from other countries who then go into like, we're going to use your technical expertise to build a factory in the middle of fucking nowhere so that we can control you and watch you forever because we're incredibly fucking paranoid, and then shoot most of you for being seditious traitors,
This is
despite the
also
fact
the
that you came here willingly. Thank
this
you, Stalin. Very cool.
this is also the origin of the closed circuit city. Also, funnily enough, during the 1920s and 30s, a lot of those technical experts were also like from around the world. Like the most fun ones are the African American communities that actually sprung up in the Soviet Union.
Yeah. Again, there's the absolute weird insanity of the Soviet Union in this time period is just like God.
Uh,
Like it's just bizarre. It's a bizarro world of
we are
like
socialist unity brethren. Stalin had to constantly be reminded that Mao Zedong existed.
oh, even better. He tried to create a Jewish autonomous republic. Then he got paranoid because that would put all the Jews in one place where they might rebel against him. And then he tried to stop that. Then he did it again.
Oh, no, another funny one was he. You think he handled Mao bad? He refused to actually even talk to Ho Chi Minh at all, ever.
Yeah,
Completely ignored him.
to be fair, so did most of the world. Let's not ditch on Stalin for this bit.
I know,
Basically,
but it's
everyone else
funny.
ignored him too. It's still funny. Um,
Another great one is when he single-handedly executed most of the Hungarian Communist Party and half of the Italian Communist Party, with
yeah,
about, I think, a third of them being killed by Mussolini by being in horrible prison conditions.
yeah. So the next page we get to the talk about the end of it, and into the 1950s, and
Yep, cult of
onto the
personality because yep, that's a big thing.
uh, Stalin, the end of Stalin, and then into the supernatural of the Revolution and Civil War, which we're finally getting to after about 2 hours.
No, we talked
Because
a little bit about it.
I mean, to be fair, the Russian Revolution is so funny
You you
as like
need
this
you need to know the Russian also the early Soviet Union from Lenin to Stalin. Oh, fun!
is
Here's a
such a
cursed fact.
bizarre place. Yes,
Here's a cursed fact. Stalin, after Stalin died, Beria was briefly the leader of the Soviet Union.
yes, and then everyone realized that we need to kill this motherfucker because he is a genuine insane person.
Do you want to know the two things that Beria did before being tried for all of the horrible sexual assault that he did?
Well,
He
just tell
got
us.
Okay, he emptied the gulags of non-political prisoners, which spiked crime rates in the Soviet Union for I believe a decade at least, and might have been the reason for the original Russian mob to form. And he tried to back away from the Russification and Russian centrism, which is actually the big killing blow. Khrushchev used that as his cudgel to get his Ukrainian boys in charge.
Jesus Christ. It's still funny though with like the death of Stalin though the movie is not inaccurate in
Oh,
how
here's
Beria
another dumb
fucking
one.
died.
Beria wanted a loan from the United States to de-escalate the Cold War.
Yeah,
Like he was like, "Hey, we'll step down on the Cold War if you give us money to
give
rebuild."
us money so we stop building tanks, which is really fucking
This is
funny.
how he got cooed because Zhukov's like, "Are you fucking dumb?"
Are you retarded? Are you like the biggest motherfucking idiot of all time? We
So
just
he
take the
helps
money
funny.
and then build the tanks anyway. Are you fucking stupid?
So him and Funny Corn Man, along with Georgy
Pull the
Malenkov,
coup.
basically.
Yeah, yeah. So the next page, I love the next page too on this. They have the fucking cartoon bomb man in front of the Kremlin.
Oh yeah,
I love the art in this section. It's really
it has
good.
good
Um,
Magnola vibes.
yeah, there's the seven. They talk about, of course, the various factions of the demons. If you don't know demon, this is not really going to explain it, so I'm not going to bother.
Basically, there's
But
like all Chronicles of Darkness. There's 5 methods of how you operate as a demon.
four actually with
Or
demons. Demons use four, not five. There
interesting.
were yes.
Sorry, it's
Fluid
just
politics. They
usually it's
talk a bit
5.
about. Usually it is five, at least in New World. It was not that in Old World. In Old World, it was like between like 10 and 13 usually.
So yeah, integrators
Um,
want to join the god back to the God Machine.
Basically, integrators want to join back the God Machine. Inquisitors want to figure out what the fuck is the God Machine doing.
Yep.
Saboteurs want to blow up the God Machine, and Tempters just want to get laid.
Yeah.
That is the basic divisions. The fluid politics, the time that they talk about right after that, which is that the revolutionary spirit has infected demon kind at this point.
I mean, with all the covers they have, it does make sense.
Yes, and they talk a little bit about that in the Constantinople one. It's right under the bomb thrower man, if you're looking.
Yep.
That's where they start talking about this. So they basically go on about like they talk about the ideology of revolution and human ideologies and their influence on the demons and on their efforts inside of
Because
the
again,
the
when they have
nature of their
covers, they
stuff.
slowly absorb elements of the covers that they make.
Right. So also some of this is like that they're trading identities constantly between both sides. So like there are demons with covers in both the white and the reds because it is a good thing to have a backup plan.
Yeah, because
There is
if you back the wrong side, you're going to have to essentially flee. And no one wants to be a white Russian in Shanghai.
yes. They then talk, of course, about the agencies divide themselves because of course they do, because the ideology and the nature of how things are moving right now cause that to happen. They talk then about papers, please, comrade, which I love. Because the high cover rolls do not actually offer bonuses to compromise rolls because the situation could just change at any time. So it's like, yes, you were once a high-ranking member of the party. Well, now your department is no longer a thing, so your cover is completely useless. Therefore, your cover no longer works well because you're a high member of a department that doesn't exist anymore.
Also,
Which how does that
also,
work?
well, because Stalin said, "Oh no, you're clearly a wrecker."
Yes, there's also that. I love this one. They talk about this, and I absolutely love this on that page. It's on page
Oh, you're talking about
310
the Red Hand Brigade,
after the Red Hand Brigade.
because that one's
The
fun.
third case, the Red Hand Brigade is fun, where it's like this group of saboteur industries that joined up with the Soviets to blow the shit out of God Machine Angels, and then kind of just disappeared. Um, but the one after it is really funny.
Here we go.
The agencies that believe that they have survived the rigors of the revolution, the civil war, attach themselves to the Bolshevik power structure as demons usually do, for survival, profit, and ideology. All seemed well for the Moscow Regional State Committee for Counter-Sentient Industrialism, which is the most Soviet name for a demon organization I could think of.
Yeah, if you really want inspiration, I do recommend looking up some of the amazing acronyms that they came up with. Like try to like the full name for Stavka, for example,
Yes, so
or Shaggy,
it
which is
gets
their air development team.
it gets really funny because the reason why they collapse is not because the God Machine gets them. Oh no, no. This is what happens to them. So they got into the party. They got to the point where in the 1930s, their official correspondence between each other is ending up accidentally in other party mail because the clerks are circulating it that they're using and getting confused.
Because like it actually seems to be legit because it's a pretty solid cover.
It's an incredibly solid cover. So suddenly the NKVD uh, discover this group and they're like, what the fuck is this agency? We've never heard of this agency. And they start
And we've
doing
heard of everyone.
investigations.
We've heard of
Yes.
everyone.
And they realize this agency doesn't actually exist. So they go ask Stalin, did you make this? What's going on? And
And
Stalin goes,
Stalin's
well, I don't know. They must obviously be quiet counter revolutionaries. Deal with them.
yeah,
So
Stalin
in truth,
legitimately, as soon as he heard about them, signed their death order.
Yes, which is hilarious. It's not the God Machine that killed them. It's Soviet paranoia, and I love it.
And
It
they were
is it
all
is an
convicted
example.
by conspiring with Trotsky and shot.
Yes.
By the way, Stalin was actually like demons are good. Stalin still permanently wiped half of them.
Like no, it's not even that demons are good. It's more like Stalin is like, "Oh, like this organization, I have no idea what it's doing, and it's in the government and I don't control
No,
it.
no, no. He
Fucking
he
get rid of
managed
it."
to wrangle all their covers. He actually killed directly
He
half of the
actually practically
agency.
killed like half of the covers. Yeah. Most of its demonic membership died. Like
That's
about half of
before the
them
God
because that was
Machine
their only
started
cover.
chasing them.
Yes. So as then they talk about, of course, covers changing and all that, and the nature of how a single cover becomes a problem. So a lot of these guys are doing like serial packs, so they'll swap between cover to cover to cover to cover. They talk, of course, about pre-industrial infrastructure because a lot of Russia is not industrial, so you need to work with that. Um, they also, of course, talk about the Orthodox Church and its nature with the God Machine, and also those angels that are falling because of the revolution is also in this section. I kind of want to wrap this a little bit up because we're getting into like a bit late, and this
We are
is a
we are running
Sunday.
late. It's just this is such a fascinating
It
time
is
period.
there's so much stuff. Like the story hooks are all really good in this section as well. And I don't want to like spoil some of them.
Yeah,
Some of them are really good. Like there's one where it's the 10 cuts that retcon the world, 1927 Leningrad, where they talk about the battleship Potemkin and the movies that were being made by Sergei Eisenstein and all these guys. Uh, and the edits of the work are also editing history and doing weird things, and you need to go and handle that, which is fantastic. There's the talk, of course, about the source of inspiration which they're using, which is, of course, Battleship Potemkin. Great movie,
definitely.
complete propaganda, but a good movie for like early filmmaking. It's a very great example of how it was done and how it works. Uh, they go with a conquest of bread, which is this talk with this Russian anarchist, which is fucking great.
Which is also
Uh,
fun because that's some again Russian Revolution. So many factions,
yep.
so many covers that are gonna burn.
And of course, 10 Days to Shook the World, which was written by a
Jack Reed.
American journalist.
Yeah, Jack
Yeah,
Reed.
John.
You would
John
most know him if you play Haha Funny map game Hoi 4. He is the leader
or
of.
Hoi too, actually, for Kaiserreich, because that's where that came
That's
from.
where it did
He's
come
one of
from.
the syndicalist leaders because he was a socialist.
He was a
Uh,
socialist who fell for the early hope that it had. He just died of, I believe it was like either tuberculosis or some other
I think it was
disease.
like TB or something like that. Yeah, and he just died very early on into it, and it's like, oh, he never got to see what actually happened. But they also go into some of these other stuff. I also highly recommend A People's Tragedy by Orlando Figes as like an introductory text to the Russian Revolution. He covers the 1905. He covers of course, the 1917 revolution as well, and a little bit of both the prelude and the aftermath. And he
Again,
covers it mostly from the perspective of like, why was this happening? And why was it so hard for the Russians to avoid something like this?
by the way, they also
Um,
give a couple of really good ones. Like, well, I mean, obviously, you do want to read the Communist Manifesto for inspiration on how the Soviets would be thinking.
yes,
It's not, it's by Marx standards, it's the shortest you're going to get.
it's incredibly short. It's
Also, if
like
you're
what
gonna
is
want
it?
to
10
shit on
pages?
communism, you kind of have to know what Marx is actually talking about.
Yes, which is why I say read Das Kapital and bore yourself to death because it is almost entirely fucking economics charts that make zero sense
Yeah.
to anyone.
Also,
But it is
Enemy
a
at the Gates,
crucial and
that's
key,
a really good one.
yeah. But yeah, Das Kapital is still a crucial and key part of the Soviet thinking of this era because to them it is the scientific proof of how their system should work. Um, good luck reading it these days though. It is dry as fuck.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
Um,
uh,
other fun ones you could probably play around with is you could probably maybe play with some anarchist sort ideas because especially if you're
yeah,
playing in the Civil War period, if you want to do like Green Army Demon, why not? Go ahead.
yeah. They also talk about the other supernaturals because some of this is actually fun. Like the vampires, of course, are having a lot of problems. The sin eaters are actually doing a lot of shit because there's a lot of ghosts because of World War One, Russian Civil War, but also was Rasputin a sin eater,
Oh, that could be
which
fun.
is a fantastic little thing. And if
That
he's not a sin eater, what about Rasputin's ghost? How about you have to deal with that shit? That'd be
Or here's
fantastic.
an even creepier one that actually plays with the vampire angle. A Strix possesses the corpse as it crawls out of the River Neva.
Yeah. There's also, of course, the mages. They officially do not become involved with the revolution, a mistake that they live to regret. Mostly because these seers of the throne immediately co-opt themselves into the revolution through manipulating people inside the ministries using magic. Uh, you know, the
Also,
seers are,
hunters organizations are completely going through reform at this point.
yes, there are hunters organizations that were, very tied to the old thing, and now there's a bunch of these guys that are like, Comrade Ilovich, he drinks blood. Is that part of the communist revolution? I am not sure yet, comrade. Do we also have to drink blood?
you have all assembled. Good, good. As you have heard, my unit was allegedly wiped by elements of the Czechoslovak Legion. That did
It was
not
not them. It was a living train that came to life and ate people, or whatever. Like,
we
you
had
could
to
easily do
use
that.
we had to steal and use battery of artillery to put it down.
Honestly, the idea of a giant living train monster possessed by like a big spirit as like an antagonist for a chronicle, like a final boss thing, sounds fucking awesome.
And
Like
now
it
I
becomes
hear
like a big
rumors.
spider monster, or like a big or like it doesn't even become like a spider
You're
monster. Like
unironically wanting Choo Choo
like
Charlie to be a fucking.
I mean,
That would work. That would
it would
actually
work.
work.
I was saying like it would either be like that or it would be like a snake thing where like it's using the track as like its
Or you
belly
could
and
have it
it's
be like Blaine the Mono from the Dark Tower.
yeah, you could. Like there's a lot of things you could do with a giant train
Uh,
monster. I just want more giant train monsters, okay?
and then you have this Russian soldier go. I came back from village 30 miles west of Yakutsk. Entire village eaten by something, not
And of
wolves,
course they
something
also go
worse.
into changelings having a civil war themselves because there's accusations on each side that the like people claiming the czar, right? But the czar is actually a loyalist to the fucking gentry. We need to deal with that. And again, a lot of this is really fun. But yeah, I would agree, Scroll Killer, that Choo Choo Charles would be a fantastic monster in this era.
I
Like
low key kind of think that no, I got it. You do a Hunter Chronicle. You're just the Czechoslovak Legion. Like you are a company of the
you're just a small group of the Czechoslovak Legion, and you're dealing with a
dude.
train that's trying to hunt you
Not just
you
the
down
trade.
and
You're
kill
just
you.
trying to get home, man, and like you stumble into more like more and more shit. And throughout it all, you just hear demonic whistles and like clacking noises that aren't on the rails. And and you've
Yes.
seen it in the shadows. It killed your regiment commander.
Yeah, and then this is the last section of the book. So there's nothing really after this in that, but I'd say that this is one of my favorite settings for the book because it gives a very digestible period of a very complex piece of history.
It's a
And
complex, wild history. If you like historical set pieces, the Russian Revolution is one that is easily one of the most fascinating. Legitimately, one of the things you could do is this actually can inspire you for others because you know what I'm also thinking. You could do Russian Revolution, but this would also be beautiful for a Chinese warlord period.
yeah, there's a lot of things that you can tie this into as well around like the
Like this gives you
1920s. And
ideas.
yeah, the I love the idea that a film edit is actually redoing history because of God Machine shenanigans. That's a fantastic story hook no matter what era you're running in.
Or you're a recently hired cell of hunters, like you've been conscripted by the NKVD to deal with the Bureau of Sentient Industries.
No, counter the Moscow Bureau of Countersentient Industrialism.
Yeah, and you have to basically investigate and deal with that.
Yeah, like there's so much that you can play with this setting, and that's what's kind of great about it. It's a very flexible setting period where there's a lot of moving parts, yes, but that's kind of the joy of it, where you can focus on a very limited area because like there's a lot of records about what was going on in say Moscow at this time, or a lot of records about what was going on in St. Petersburg. I would say that this is excellent as a setting. Like I wouldn't call it amazing or perfect because there are issues, as I've said before, in that there is a lot of things you can debate about the Russian Revolution in terms of like who was like not necessarily morality, but like what actually happened at certain periods, because there's so many accounts that kind of contradict each other.
Oh yeah,
Um,
especially since both sides were trying as hard as they can to downplay their crimes.
yes, so it can it's a very, again, complicated time period, and it also kind of leads into the really stupid historiography where they try to describe like Stalin killed 100 million people, and it's like no, he didn't. He killed maybe 20 million, and that's even stretching it. Like it's hard. You get into some of these wonky gray areas of history of atrocities where people are trying to upplay or downplay how bad things were, and it gets kind of stupid and infuriating to me, where it's like, no, we have records, we have all these other things, they were bad enough already, you don't have to exaggerate it.
Yeah, like usually the 100 million is attributed to Mao, but honestly, just based on because the Chinese are very excellent record keepers. Like if you actually look, it's closer to
Yeah,
50.
yeah, and with like, yeah, that's still fucking horrific, but it's like
That's
you don't have to
beyond
exaggerate it.
horrific. I'm just pointing out, like,
And it's like yes, the gulags killed 3 million people, that's
The
bad.
Holodomor existed and it wiped, I believe, what was it, 4
About
million at
three to
least?
five. 3 to 5 is generally the accepted terms. And even then, it's like there are areas where it's debatable how much of this was deliberate party policy, how much of this was people being retarded, how much of this was forced collectivization as a general thing, how much of this was climactic issues that were also hitting other parts of Europe that hit Russia hardest because Russian agriculture, Lamau.
Yeah,
Like, there's,
let's be fair because the basic principles are it's the same thing as the Tsar did. Did they just take the winter grain, or did they just, to cover for their losses, take from the Kazakh tribesmen and just interpreted that as, oh, we're going to use force? Or was it, oh, good, we don't have to deal with restive peoples known for their independent streak?
yeah, that's where it gets hard to say.
It
And
doesn't
that's why
matter at the end because it's
at
still
the
an
end of the day, a
atrocity.
lot of people fucking died, and it's an atrocity. But
And it is a genocide.
it is, but it's hard to. But it's one of those things where it's like I don't want to ascribe like deliberate malice, where incompetence is easily just as good of an explanation, if not worse.
I would still ascribe some malice. Let's be fair. It's Stalin's Soviet
It's still
Union.
the solid Soviet Union, where malice is probably part of it. Yes, but you kind of get where I get at, where it's like it's very hard for me as someone who's a fan of history to be like extremely definitive on stuff like this, where there's a lot of stuff that we just don't know. Like because a lot of these guys got shot. Okay, like
It's actually
quite
really funny if you look at a lot of the NKVD, for example, went through two heads of it because one of the most common methods to place the blame away from you is to just blame the NKVD for the atrocities because hey, the Okhrana did atrocities. Would it not make sense for these guys to do atrocities? Bye, Yezov.
exactly. Like that's the other thing with that is that early Soviet history is such a mess because so much of it gets rewritten by the people that killed all their enemies.
Stalin legitimately had a professional photo editor just so he could just erase every party member he either evicted or killed, or both.
Yeah, and it's like, again, it's hard to know whether it's worse to say it was malice or whether it's worse to say it's incompetence, and it's a hard fucking call.
Uh,
And I don't.
it's incompetence when it comes to the Sharashka program, which is the prisons that the scientists are hidden in.
Yeah,
I
but
need
yeah,
you
like
to
that's kind
stay
of,
in the Soviet Union so you go to prison. How do you
yeah.
want me to build new? You built out of this,
You build
throws it.
you build thing in shed with box of scraps like Tony Stark in his movie Iron Man. Must capitalist degeneracy.
No. You have to mine it from scrap, like Minecraft. You have to get the pickaxe and mine it.
Anyway, I think that we can call it here
Oh yeah,
though. And
as for my rating, very high, good. It is an inspirational idea. It covers an excellent time period that, admittedly, it's a little bit broad, I think, just because of how wide the circumstances are, but I think that's to its benefit because it gives you flexibility. Do you want to play, I wouldn't say young, but wide-eyed revolutionary saboteurs trying to bring down the infrastructure and bring your own Are you just in it because, oh hell yeah, I can profit off of this, like a merchant of death? Or
Or are you just literally trying to get out of this situation because it's like, oh, I was the fucking painter for like the Winter Palace as a demon that was doing like weird occult symbols, and now the palace is on fire and I need to get out of here.
Or alternatively, you're an integrator who wishes to join back because you originally provided, I don't know, during the early Tsar tank program, infrastructure in the tank plants, like the machine plants,
Yeah,
so
there's a
that some
lot of stuff
things
you
can
can do.
fall off the truck, so to speak, for the God Machine.
There's a lot of stuff that you can play with and
And
a lot
that's just in
of
the revolution. There's also the crazy ones that like you could do like full on anarchist, destroy all infrastructure, return to monkey.
there's also this stuff going on. We didn't even touch on Central Asia that much, which is this insane place during this time.
Oh God, yes. To give you an idea on the insanity of Central Asia, did you know during this time period there is actually a millenarian anti-shamanistic tribal movement among several Turkic tribes close to the Xinjiang border.
Yeah,
It was
there's
made in response and against the attempts to forcibly convert them to Russian Orthodoxy and to forcibly settle Russians into their homeland.
there it was also partially in response to some other millenarian death movements, including one claiming that a certain Russian colonel was in fact the reincarnation of Genghis Khan.
Oh no, they weren't tied to von Sternberg at all. They actually instead venerated Oirat Khan.
Oh no.
They were slightly inspired by Tengri. It's called Akjang or Burkhanism, and it is still
This is just
native to
even
the region of Altai Krai to this day.
that
Also,
sometimes I
funnily enough,
forget that
Altai
Central
Krai,
Asia.
a major source of mining and minerals. It was they actually forcibly the Soviets under Stalin and later on, I believe, Brezhnev and Khrushchev would develop processing centers in the region to exploit its silver and gold ore. Like you could legitimately here's a fun demon campaign. You have to set up infrastructure. You have to set up your own little personal heaven in Central Asia, and your idea is to run a dandelion farm.
I think with that,
No,
we
one
should
more.
stop.
You have to work with funny corn man to bring maize to the Ukraine.
No, no, we need to stop. We need to stop.
It's time to stop.
It's time to stop. Good
But no,
night, everyone.
good night, and make sure to meet your quota, or you will be sent to Lubyanka.